In the vast, dark tapestry of space, countless stars glimmer like scattered embers of a long dead fire. Among them, a lone world, a cradle of humanity, spun in silent orbit. This was Terra, a world once vibrant and full of promise, now scarred by ages of strife and despair. Yet, even in the deepest darkness, a single light can ignite a new dawn. A vision held in the mind of a being beyond mortal comprehension. A dream of unity, of a future where humanity would stand together, not as warring tribes, but as a species united in purpose. This is the story of that grand vision and the dawn of an age of legends. It is a tale of the Emperor of mankind and the ambitious, galaxy-spanning crusade he was about to unleash. A crusade to reclaim what was lost and to forge a new destiny for humanity among the stars. The long night of old Earth before the coming of the Emperor. Terra was a shadow of its former self. Millennia of terror and isolation, an era known as the Age of Strife, or Old Night, had fractured what remained of humanity's ancient global civilization. The once gleaming cities were now tombs, and the oceans had largely boiled away, leaving behind vast, toxic deserts. What was once the Pacific Ocean was now a vastly smaller sea, a grim reminder of the thermonuclear wars that had consumed the world. Across this shattered landscape, barbarian warlords ruled with iron fists, hoarding the last remnants of advanced technology. Nations and empires rose and fell in brutal, short-lived dynasties. In the lands once known as North America, the hive cities of America warred for supremacy. The Nord-Afric conclaves fought bitter conflicts, sometimes employing dark, forbidden powers drawn from the warp. Mighty empires like the Pan-Pacific, led by the tyrant Narthan Doom and the power of Caligan of Ursh, the mightiest of the barbarian states, held sway over vast territories, their armies clashing in endless wars of attrition. For 2,500 years, continuous warfare raged across the planet. Surface turning the cradle of mankind into a battered, post-apocalyptic wasteland. It was a dark and violent age, where humanity's greatest achievements were lost to memory, and survival was a daily struggle. But even in this oppressive darkness, a figure was moving, a being who had watched humanity as rise and fall for millennia, waiting for the precise moment to reveal himself. The emergence of the Emperor. For thousands of years, he had walked among humanity in secret, a silent observer, guiding history from the shadows. Born in the 8th millennium BC in a humble Anatolian village, this immortal being, a powerful psyker, was a culmination of ancient shamans who sacrificed themselves to create a guardian for humanity against the nascent threat of chaos. He had witnessed empires rise and crumble, and had taken on countless identities, from conquerors to advisors, always working towards a singular, long-term goal: the preservation and ascension of the human race. The end of the Age of Strife, marked by the becoming of the warp storms that had isolated Terra, presented the opportunity he had long awaited. Sensing the time was right, the man who would be known as the Emperor of Mankind finally stepped out of the shadows. He emerged not as a humble guide, but as a conqueror, a warlord with a vision grander than any barbarian could conceive. His goal was not merely to rule Terra, but to reunite all of humanity, scattered across the galaxy on long, lost colony worlds. This was the genesis of the Imperium of Man and the beginning of the Unification Wars. The Thunder Warriors, a necessary brutality to achieve his monumental task. The Emperor needed an army unlike any seen before. In his hidden laboratories, deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, he had been working on the creation of genetically engineered super soldiers. These were the Thunder Warriors, the precursors to the Space Marines, recruited from the ranks of the Emperor's followers as adults. These warriors were subjected to sophisticated gene sculpting and alchemical augmentation. The result was a legion of soldiers who were physically stronger and more potent in combat than even the later Astartes. Clad in primitive but effective power armor emblazoned with the Emperor's personal sigil of a raptor and thunderbolt, they were living weapons, icons of the Emperor's might. The Thunder Warriors were a blunt instrument, designed for a singular, brutal purpose: to conquer Terra quickly and decisively. Their very presence on the battlefield was enough to make many warlords surrender. Those who resisted soon learned that the reputation of the Thunder Warriors was no exaggeration. They were unleashed upon the techno-barbarian states with ruthless efficiency, their campaigns leaving a wake of destruction. Great powers that had dominated Terra for centuries, like the Mal and Sen Confederacy and the Ethnarchy, fell before them. The conquest of the Ethnarchy subterranean strongholds was particularly costly, claiming the lives of 20,000 Thunder Warriors in an early attempt. Yet, the Thunder Warriors were a flawed creation, a compromise born of necessity. Their creation process was rushed, resulting in genetic instability, mental degradation, and shortened lifespans. They were a tool for a specific age, and the Emperor knew they had no place in the future he envisioned. According to imperial myth, the last of the Thunder Warriors perished heroically at the final battle of the Unification Wars, the Battle of Mount Ararat. The truth, however, is a darker secret, for these loyal warriors were ultimately betrayed and culled by their creator once their purpose was served, making way for a more stable and enduring generation of super soldiers. The genesis of the Astartes and the Primarchs. Even as the Thunder Warriors fought his wars on Terra, the Emperor was already planning for the next stage of his grand vision, the Great Crusade to reclaim the stars. For this, he would need leaders of unparalleled ability, generals and diplomats who could command his legions and govern a galactic empire. This led to the Primarch Project, the Emperor's most ambitious undertaking yet. In the advanced gene labs on Terra and Luna, the Emperor, alongside brilliant scientists like Amar Astarte, began the process of creating 20 superhuman sons, crafted from his own genetic material. These beings, the Primarchs, were designed to be paragons of humanity, each embodying different aspects of strategy, leadership, and martial prowess. They were to be the genetic fathers of the Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines, who would be more stable and disciplined than the Thunder Warriors they were to replace. The first true Space Marines, crafted without Primarch gene, seed, and drawing their genetic material directly from the Emperor, were already being tested in the final battles of the Unification Wars. The I Legion, later known as the Dark Angels, were the first to be formally established, comprised of recruits from diverse and warlike cultures across Terra, their varied martial traditions forged into a singular, potent fighting force. The Primarch Project, however, was a venture of immense complexity, utilizing not just advanced science, but also forbidden knowledge of the warp, which the Emperor had acquired on the world of Moloch. This mingling of science and arcane power was a terrible risk. While the 20 infant Primarchs grew within their gestation capsules, protected by powerful wards, the dark gods of chaos watched from the immaterium. Seeing the Emperor's plan as a grave threat to their own existence, they acted. A great vortex tore through the laboratory, snatching the infant Primarchs away and scattering them across the galaxy, their destinies forever altered by the touch of chaos. Though this was a devastating blow, the Emperor's dream was not extinguished. The Great Crusade would proceed, and one of its primary objectives would now be to find his lost sons, wherever they may be, deep beneath the stone of Terra, deeper than any mountain, root, or ocean, trench. A grand and silent work was underway. The unification of the cradle of humanity was complete. The savage wars were over. But the Emperor of mankind, ever looking to the horizon, saw a galaxy of lost worlds. He saw a species scattered among the stars, vulnerable and alone. His previous creations, the mighty Thunder Warriors, had been a necessary storm, powerful, but crude and ultimately unstable. They were a weapon for a single war, not the foundation for an eternal future. For the Great Crusade, his ultimate vision of a unified human empire, he needed more. He needed sons. He envisioned 20 generals, 20 demigods, who would be second only to himself. They would be beacons of humanity, potential, leaders and statesmen as much as warriors. The Primarch project, as it was known, began in the 29th millennium. It was an undertaking of breathtaking scale, hidden from all but a chosen few. Deep within the earth, far from the light of the sun, vast laboratories were carved from the planet's core. This was a place of sterile white corridors and humming machinery, of silent, watchful servitors and the quiet hum of immense power. Here, the Emperor brought together the greatest scientific minds of the age. Chief among them was Biotechnical Division Director Amar Astarte, a genius of genetics whose name would one day be given to the Space Marines. And beside her, another key figure, a perpetual like the Emperor himself, a woman named Erda. She was a powerful geneticist, ancient and wise, and she would provide the raw material, the genetic matrix to complement the Emperor's own. She was, in a very real sense, the mother of the Primarchs. The process was a fusion of two worlds. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard science, and a terrifying foray into the arcane. The Emperor used his own DNA as the primary template, the foundation upon which his sons would be built. From this, 20 distinct genetic strands were crafted, each one designed to be unique, to possess its own strengths and character. Human DNA was even woven into some of the samples, subtle additions to enhance their already formidable nature. But this was more than simple genetic manipulation. The Emperor reached for something deeper, something far more dangerous. It is whispered that he used forbidden knowledge, arcane lore gleaned from the raw energy of the warp itself. Many believe he traveled to a distant world called Malix, where he passed through a gateway into the realm of chaos. There, he confronted the ruinous powers, and through some unknown bargain or great act of will, stole from them the secrets of creating life, imbued with the very essence of the soul. This psychic sorcery was the missing piece. It would elevate his creations from mere biological machines to beings of immense charisma and power, their souls shining like newborn stars in the immaterium. And so, in accelerated gene culturing chambers, the 20 Primarchs began to grow. They floated in amniotic fluid, suspended between life and unlife. They were perfect infant forms, sleeping in their glass wombs, watched over by nervous scientists who understood the terrible power they were helping to unleash. Each was a promise. One held the seed of unyielding loyalty. Another, the spark of tactical genius. A third contained a quiet, burning empathy, while his brother held the potential for savage, untamed fury. They were all different, each a facet of the Emperor's own complex being, designed for a specific purpose in the grand tapestry of the coming Imperium. They were to be humanity as guides and protectors, the living embodiment of the Emperor's dream. But a dream so bright casts a very dark shadow. The Chaos Gods, those malignant entities that dwelled within the warp, could not abide such a vision of order and unity. They saw the Primarchs not as saviors, but as a dire threat to their own existence, which fed upon strife and despair. They watched the project from their timeless realm, and they plotted its ruin. They saw 20 shining souls, and they desired to corrupt them, to turn the Emperor's greatest hope into his most profound failure. Yet, the first blow against the project did not come from without. It came from within. It came from a mother, Sart Erda, the perpetual who had given her own essence to the creation of the Primarchs, saw a future that horrified her. She did not see her sons as generals or tools, but as children. She foresaw the lives of endless war the Emperor had planned for them, the crushing weight of duty, and the loss of their own free will. She saw them as sacrifices upon the altar of his ambition, and she could not bear it. She believed she had to save them from their father's terrible destiny, and so she made a fateful choice. Unbeknownst to her, her grief and desperation were a beacon to the waiting powers of the warp. They answered her desire, amplifying her power, twisting her act of love into a catastrophe. Erda, in her effort to free her children, opened a gateway. In the silent, sterile laboratories deep beneath the Himalayas, reality tore open. No sound, no explosion, just a silent, swirling vortex of raw chaos erupting in the heart of the facility. Gellar fields, designed to protect the infants from warp intrusion, flickered and died. The swirling vortex was a storm of color and shadow, a hungry mouth that pulled at everything. Scientists and servitors were ripped apart, their silent screams swallowed by the void. The carefully controlled environment of the laboratory was plunged into pandemonium. The 20 incubation pods were lifted from their moorings, their precious cargo helpless. One by one, they were sucked into the churning portal, stolen from their birthplace before they could ever draw a conscious breath. They were cast out into the tides of the immaterium, scattered like seeds on a gale. Force wind across the vast and unforgiving galaxy. The chaos gods tampered with them as they fell, nudging their paths, whispering dark promises to their slumbering souls, planting the seeds of future betrayals. Each pod, protected by the Emperor, a lingering power and perhaps guided by some other unknown force, eventually fell from the warp. They came to rest on 20 different worlds, scattered far beyond the Emperor's reach. None were lost to the void. Each landed on a habitable planet, many with human populations, worlds of savage ice, brutal jungles, feudal honor, and enlightened philosophy. These worlds would become their crucibles, shaping them in ways the Emperor had never intended. Their upbringing would mold them for better and for worse. Back on Terra, the storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. The vortex sealed itself, leaving behind a ruined laboratory and a profound, crushing silence. The Emperor's sons were gone. His grandest project lay in ruins. Amar Astarte looked upon the devastation and saw the entire endeavor as a failure, believing the genetic stability of the future Space Marines was now forever compromised. But the Emperor did not despair. He stood in the wreckage of his hopes, and he could feel, through the vast emptiness of space, that his children were still alive. He could not reach them, not yet, but he had their genetic legacy. From the DNA samples he had saved, he would create a new army. He would forge the Space Marine Legions, 20 of them, each crafted from the genetic code of a lost son. These legions would be the instruments of his great crusade. They would march out into the galaxy, and as they conquered world after lost world, he would search. He would follow visions and whispers across the void, relentless in his quest to find his scattered sons and reunite them with the warriors who shared their blood. It had simply become a long and arduous hunt. The age of the Primarchs had not ended in the darkness beneath Terra. It had just begun in the lonely light of 20 distant stars. The silent hum of the stasis fields was the only sound within the sanctum. Deep beneath the mountains of Terra, in a vault of impossible science and whispered secrets, the future of humanity slept. 20 infant sons. The Primarchs lay suspended in amniotic fluid, their potential a silent, roaring fire in the warp. They were the Emperor, ES answer to a galaxy drowning in darkness. Each was a demigod in waiting, a beacon of hope crafted from genetic artistry, and the Emperor's own formidable power. They were perfect, a new generation of leaders, destined to guide humanity back to its rightful place among the stars. But perfection, in a universe teeming with malevolent forces, is often a fragile thing. Beyond the material realm, in the roiling, emotional sea of the warp, ancient eyes had been watching. The Chaos Gods, those vast and terrible entities born from the collective unconscious of mortals, saw the Emperor's grand design not as a dawn, but as a twilight for their own reign. An ordered, rational galaxy, united under a single powerful leader, was a threat to their very existence. They fed on strife, on passion, on the raw, untamed emotions that the Emperor sought to control. So they began to whisper. Their insidious voices, like oil on water, seeped through the thinnest veils of reality. They were drawn to the immense psychic light of the sleeping Primarchs, a light that shone like a lighthouse in the ethereal storm of the warp. The Geller fields, the psychic shields that protected the laboratory, began to groan under the strain of an unseen assault. They flickered like a candle in a gale, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, they failed. In that instant, a vortex of raw immaterium, a maelstrom of screaming color and impossible sound, tore through the heart of the sanctum. The carefully crafted piece of the laboratory was shattered. The stasis pods, once impervious, cracked and splintered under the psychic onslaught. One by one, the infant Primarchs were ripped from their cradles of shimmering light and cast into the churning chaos of the warp. They were scattered like seeds on a storm wind, flung far and wide across the vast, uncaring expanse of the galaxy. A moment of cosmic theft that would forever alter the course of human history. Each tiny vessel of potential was sent on a different trajectory, their fates now surrendered to the whims of the warp and the nature of the worlds they would eventually find. The Chaos Gods had not sought to destroy the Primarchs. Their plan was far more subtle, far more cruel. They wished to corrupt them, to twist the Emperor as greatest weapons and turn them against their creator. The Primarchs were scattered to worlds that would shape them, that would test their very souls. Lemon Russ, the Wolf King, landed on the death world of Fenris, a planet of ice and fire, of savage beasts and hardy warriors. He was found by a she-wolf and raised among the beasts of the wild, his primal nature nurtured by the unforgiving landscape. Vulcan, the fire-born, was cast down upon the volcanic world of Nocturne, a planet of ash and fire. He was discovered by a blacksmith, and his formative years were spent in the forge, his hands shaping metal, his heart filled with a deep and abiding empathy for his people. Rogel Dorn, the stoic defender, found himself on the ice world of Inuit, a planet whose people were as unyielding and pragmatic as the frozen wastes they inhabited. He was raised by the patriarch of a great ice, clan his mind shaped by logic and discipline. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, was sent to the stormy world of Medusa, a land of warring clans and technological marvels. He was forced to fight for his survival from the moment he arrived, his flesh and spirit hardened by constant conflict. And so, it was for all 20. Each Primarch landed on a world that would become a crucible, a place of testing that would either forge them into the heroes the Emperor intended, or break them into something far darker. The silent boy who would become Corvus Corax was sent to the prison moon of Lycius, a place of oppression and despair. He was raised by the enslaved, and his heart was filled with a burning desire for freedom. The twin Primarchs, Alpharius and Omegon, were scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy, their fates intertwined in a web of secrecy and deception. Back on Terra, the Emperor stood in the ruins of his laboratory. The silence was a physical weight, a crushing testament to his loss. His dream, the culmination of millennia of planning and sacrifice, had been stolen from him. A grief that would have shattered a lesser being washed over him, followed by a cold, incandescent rage. But the Emperor was not a being given to despair. He could feel the faint psychic echoes of his sons, scattered but not extinguished, burning like distant stars in the vastness of the night. He knew what he had to do. His grand design had been delayed, but not defeated. He would build a new army, a legion of warriors forged in his own image, to carry his light to the darkest corners of the galaxy. These would be the Space Marines, transhuman soldiers of immense power and unwavering loyalty. They would be the instruments of his great crusade, a vast, galaxy-spanning quest to find his lost sons and reunite his scattered people. The Great Crusade was more than just a military campaign. It was a pilgrimage, a desperate search for the missing pieces of the Emperor. Soul, he knew that the Chaos Gods had not acted out of mere spite. They had planted seeds of corruption, and he feared what might have taken root in the hearts of his sons. He knew that their minds, their very souls, were being tested in the fires of their new, harsh realities. And so, as the first of the great legionary fleets prepared to leave the Sol system, a new age began. The age of strife was over, but a new conflict, a shadow war for the souls of the Primarchs, had just begun. The whispers in the warp had not faded. They were growing louder, more insistent, a constant, tempting chorus in the minds of the lost and lonely sons of the Emperor. The Great Scattering was not merely an act of sabotage. It was the opening move in a game that would decide the fate of the galaxy, a tragedy whose echoes would reverberate through 10,000 years of war and darkness. The Emperor's dream of a united humanity was now a fragile hope, a flickering flame in a gathering storm. Not all the seeds of nascent godhood found fertile soil. Some fell on barren rock, others in shadowed vales, and a rare few in gardens of fleeting beauty. Each world, a cradle and a crucible, shaped the demigod within, from the lawless dark to the chilling frost, from the pristine to the profane. These scattered sons of the Emperor grew into vastly different men, their upbringings a galaxy apart. On the death world of Caliban, a planet shrouded in forests, stalked by warp, a child landed alone. For a decade, he knew no human contact, no language, but the roar of the predator and the whisper of the wind through the gargantuan trees. He hunted and was hunted, his only companions the primal instincts that screamed for survival. This wild, feral boy grew strong and cunning, more creature of the forest than man. One day, the sound of human laughter pierced the gloom of his solitary existence, a sound he had never heard before. He was discovered by a band of knights from the Order, a brotherhood dedicated to hunting the great beasts that plagued Caliban. One night, a man named Luther saw past the feral exterior and spared the boy, bringing him back to their fortress, monastery. Son of the forest, the lion learned quickly, his Primarch intellect absorbing language, strategy, and the chivalric code of the knights. His prowess in battle was unmatched, his strategic mind brilliant. He united the disparate knightly orders of Caliban, launching a grand crusade to purge the world of the great beasts. For 10 years they fought, and when the last monster fell, the lion was named Supreme Grand Master, the undisputed ruler of a world finally at peace. Yet, this feral upbringing left its mark, a deep-seated secrecy, a brooding silence, and the unnerving stillness of an apex predator. A different fate awaited the child who fell upon Chemos. This was a world dying a slow death, its resources plundered, its people clinging to existence in fortress, factories under a perpetual twilight sky. Art and leisure were long forgotten luxuries, sacrificed for the sake of survival. Here, the infant was discovered not by knights, but by humble factory workers. They saw not a wild thing, but a perfect child, and named him Fulgrim, after a mythical god of creation. Fulgrim grew with unnatural speed, and, by half the age of his peers, he was not just fulfilling his factory quotas, but exceeding them, his mind intuitively understanding and improving the machinery he worked with. By the age of 15, he had risen from a line worker to an executive of the Calyx factory, learning of the slow decay of his world. He set himself the task of saving it. Under his guidance, engineers reclaimed old outposts, reopened mines, and revitalized the dying industry. For the first time in generations, Chemos produced a surplus. With survival assured, Fulgrim reintroduced the arts, fostering a cultural renaissance. 50 years after his arrival, he was the sole beloved leader of a world reborn. His upbringing instilled in him a relentless drive for perfection, a belief that anything could be improved, beautified, and made flawless. In the mountainous states of Olympia, another Primarch was found. Perturabo was discovered climbing the sheer cliffs below the city of Lochos. He was a prodigy, a child who could defeat warriors twice his size and solve puzzles that baffled scholars. The tyrant of Lochos, Demekos, adopted the boy, seeing in him a tool to further his own ambitions. Perturabo was given the finest education in military and scholarly arts, and he excelled, mastering siegecraft amidst the constant political warfare of his new home. Yet, he remained a cold and distant child, aware that his adoptive father's affection was intertwined with his usefulness. He saw the greed and the power, grasping nature of the Olympian courts, and felt used, a brilliant mind and creator, forced into the role of a weapon. This feeling was compounded by a haunting celestial phenomenon, visible only to him, a swirling vortex in the sky that would later be known as the Eye of Terror. It seemed to watch him, to judge him, fostering a deep-seated paranoia and a simmering resentment that would curdle into bitterness. Far across the galaxy, on the ice world of Inwit, another sun landed. The planet was tidally locked, one side a frozen wasteland of ice crevasses and shard, storms the other, a sun-scorched desert. It was a death world, breeding a people who were strong, grim, and dedicated to the survival of the collective over the individual. Here, the Primarch was found by the ice, tribe of Dorn, and was named Rogel. He was raised by the clan as patriarch, who became a grandfather to him, teaching him tactics, strategy, and diplomacy. Rogel Dorn's nature was a perfect match for the people of Inwit. He rose to lead the House of Dorn, and eventually became the emperor of the entire Inwit cluster, a small but formidable interstellar empire they had carved out during the Age of Strife. The people of Inwit were not unsophisticated barbarians. They possessed advanced technology and some of the finest shipyards in the Segmentum. Yet they deliberately preserved their harsh way of life to instill strength. This upbringing forged Dorn into a being of unwavering resolve, a master of defense and logistics, his mind as unyielding and structured as the subterranean ice, hives of his youth. In the deepest cold of the death world Fenris, a child was not found by men, but by a giant Fenrisian wolf. She raised the Primarch alongside her own cubs, and for years he ran with the pack, his brothers the wolves Jerry and Freki. He learned the way of the hunt, the law of the wild. One harsh winter, the pack, driven by hunger, attacked a human settlement. During the ensuing battle, the Primarch, now nearly a man, was captured and brought before King Thengar of the people of Rus. He learned to speak, to wield an axe and a sword, his Primarch mind grasping the arts of war with astonishing speed. The king named him Lemon of the Rus. His strength became the stuff of legend. It was said he could uproot trees with his bare hands and wrestle mammoths to the ground. Lemon Rus became the wolf, king of Fenris, his authority absolute. His upbringing made him fierce, loyal, and joyous in battle, yet with a wildness that could never be fully tamed. Some worlds were not merely harsh, but truly benighted. The Primarch who landed on Nostramo knew no parentage, no guiding hand. His pod crashed through the planet, as crust burying him deep within the polluted crime. Ridden hive city of Nostramo Quintus, he clawed his way to the surface, a child alone, in a world of perpetual darkness, where the only law was that of the predator. He survived by hunting the feral animals in the underhives, and when they were gone, he began to hunt the criminals. He was plagued by horrific, prophetic visions of death and darkness, waking dreams that showed him the bleakest of futures. These visions, combined with the rampant injustice he witnessed, ignited a brutal crusade. He became a vigilante terror. The night haunter, the bodies of criminals, began to appear, hideously displayed. Fear became his only tool for order. He single-handedly broke the stranglehold of crime on Nostramo, not through inspiration, but through sheer, unrelenting terror, until the day the people, in their fear, crowned him their king. Not all found themselves alone or among strangers. The child who fell to Chthoniya, a resource-stripped mining world honeycombed with tunnels and dominated by anarchic gangs, was found. This world, so close to Terra, was a post-industrial nightmare. The infant was discovered by a gang overlord and given the name Nurgti, growing up in the endless violent turf wars of the underhives. But his time there was cut short. Unlike his brothers, who spent decades, even centuries, on their adopted worlds, this Primarch was the first to be rediscovered by the Emperor. He was taken from the darkness of Chthoniya, gangs, and raised at the Emperor's side. For 30 years, he was the only son. He learned of the galaxy and the Great Crusade, not from knights, or factory workers, or tribal chieftains, but from the master of mankind himself. He was named Horus Lupercal. This unique upbringing, a brief, brutal tutelage in the gangs followed by decades, as the Emperor's sole companion, forged him into a charismatic and brilliant leader, the favored son, seemingly embodying the very best of all his brothers. From the wild forests to the frozen wastes, from dying factories to warring city-states, each Primarch was a product of their world. These diverse upbringings would define them, planting the seeds of their greatest triumphs and their most devastating failures. They were brothers, forged from the same divine blueprint, yet they were strangers, shaped by worlds and experiences a universe apart. The Great Crusade had begun, a tide of steel and fire pouring out from Terra, reclaiming the lost worlds of humanity in the Emperor's name. Fleets beyond counting pierced the darkness between stars, carrying legions of super-human warriors. The Space Marines, they were magnificent, each a master of war, a testament to the Emperor's genius. But they were incomplete. They were sons without their fathers, and the Emperor, for all his power, felt the aching void of their absence. He could sense his lost children scattered across the vast, uncaring canvas of the galaxy. They were faint echoes in the warp, glimmers of psychic light on worlds he had yet to see. This was more than a crusade of conquest. It was a pilgrimage, a father's quest to find his sons. The fleets pushed ever outward, guided by the nascent light of the Astronomicon, and on a world not so far from Terra, a scarred and brutal planet named Chthoniya, the first echo was found. Chthoniya was a world of tunnels and mines, its natural resources stripped away millennia ago. Its people lived in the dark, in vast subterranean hives, where brutal gangs fought endless wars over scraps. It was here, in this violent darkness, that the Emperor found his firstborn, Horus. When the Emperor's golden ship descended, the gangs of Chthoniya looked up and saw a second son. From it emerged a being of impossible light and majesty. He walked through the grim, polluted corridors of the Under, and the hardened gangers fell to their knees, not in fear, but in awe. He found Horus not as a king, but as a warrior who had risen through the bloody ranks of the gangs. The meeting between them is a moment shrouded in legend, yet it is known that Horus recognized his father instantly. There was an undeniable connection, a resonance that went deeper than blood or bone. For a long time, for 30 years, Horus was the only son at the Emperor's side. He learned at his father's knee, not just the art of war, but the grand vision for the Imperium. They fought together and dreamed together. Horus became the brightest star in the Emperor's new galaxy, a beacon of hope and a peerless commander. His legion, the 16th, who had fought fiercely in the early days of the Crusade, were christened the Luna Wolves in honor of their conquest of Terra's moon. Now, they had their Primarch, and their pride was boundless. Nearly 2 decades passed before the second echo was found, far across the galaxy on a world of ice and fire named Fenris. This was a death world, a place of savage beauty and unrelenting hardship. Mighty volcanoes broke through glaciers that stretched for thousands of miles, and monstrous creatures roamed the frozen wastes. Here, the Emperor found Lemon Russ, but he did not find him in a palace. He found him in the wilderness, running with a pack of giant wolves. Russ had been raised by these creatures, growing into a warrior of unmatched ferocity and strength, before being found by the human tribes of Fenris. He had learned their language and their ways, eventually rising to become their king, Lemon of the Russ. The Emperor's arrival on Fenris was not met with an immediate pledge of loyalty. Russ, proud and wild, saw not a father, but a challenger. What followed was a contest of champions, a series of trials to test strength, endurance, and spirit. They wrestled, they hunted, and they drank legendary quantities of Fenrisian ale. For days they competed, until at last, the Emperor, through a display of both immense power and subtle wisdom, proved his superiority. Lemon Russ, the Wolf King, laughed a great booming laugh that cracked the ice around them, and knelt. He had found a master worthy of his service. He was given command of the 6th Legion, and in time they would be known as the Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioners, loyal and fierce beyond measure. The pace of discovery began to quicken, as if finding the first 2 had somehow cleared a path through the cosmic wilderness. The next to be found was the Master of Metal, Ferrus Manus, on the harsh, storm-racked world of Medusa. Medusa was a planet of constant geological upheaval, where wandering clans battled not only each other, but the very world itself. Ferrus had grown up alone, forging his own destiny against the planet's brutal nature. In a legendary battle with a great metallic beast, his hands had been coated in living metal, becoming the silver appendages that would give his legion their name. When the Emperor arrived, he found a stern, pragmatic leader who believed that weakness was a flaw to be purged. Like Russ, Ferrus tested the Emperor's strength, and only after being bested did he accept his father and his destiny as the leader of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands. Soon after, another son was found, on a world that could not have been more different. Chemos was a planet dying from its own industry, its people toiling in vast factory. It was here that Fulgrim was discovered. From his humble beginnings as a factory worker, He had risen through his intelligence and charisma to become the leader of his people, bringing efficiency, order, and a spark of artistry to their gray existence. When the Emperor's vessel arrived, Fulgrim recognized the warriors from the stars as the civilized and cultured brothers he had always longed for. He knelt before the Emperor without a word, offering his sword and his service. He was a vision of perfection, and his Third Legion, who had suffered near catastrophic losses from a flaw in their gene seed, were given a new name and a new purpose. The Emperor, moved by their devotion, granted them the right to bear his own personal standard. The Palatine Aquila. From that day forward, they would be known as the Emperor's children. And so the search continued. On a volcanic death world named Noble Vulcan was discovered, a blacksmith of incredible skill and deep compassion. He too challenged the Emperor, but in contests of craft and fortitude. In the frozen darkness of Nostromo, a world steeped in crime and fear, the terrifying and just Conrad Kurz was found. On the irradiated plains of Baal, the angelic Sanguinius was brought into the fold, his magnificent wings a symbol of both his grace and his terrible hidden flaw. Each reunion was a unique story, a new thread woven into the growing tapestry of the Great Crusade. But not every discovery was a joyous occasion. Some worlds had twisted the Emperor, suns shaping them in shadow and pain. On the toxic world of Barbarous, Mortarion was found. He had grown up the adopted son of a terrible necromantic warlord, raised in a fortress high in the planet's poisonous fog. He despised the sorcery of his captors and escaped to lead the oppressed human population in a war of liberation. Mortarion was on the verge of his final victory, ready to confront his hated foster father, when the Emperor arrived. The master of mankind, seeing his son about to be overcome by the toxic atmosphere, intervened, striking the final blow himself. For Mortarion, it was not a rescue, but a theft of his vengeance. He bent his knee and accepted command of the 14th Legion, the Death Guard. But a seed of resentment had been planted deep in his soul. With each son found, the Great Crusade gained momentum. The Primarchs were living legends, demigods whose presence inspired untold devotion in their legions and brought entire systems into compliance through their sheer charisma and strategic brilliance. Horus, ever the first, grew closest to his brothers, forging bonds of friendship and rivalry that would define the coming age. He fought alongside Fulgrim for nearly a century, and their legions became the closest of brethren. He learned from each of them, just as they learned from him. The Emperor began to delegate more and more responsibility to his sons, allowing them to lead their own expeditionary fleets, to carve out their own legends among the stars. The quest was far from over, but a new dawn was breaking. The Father had found his sons, and together they would conquer the galaxy. The last echoes of the Unification Wars had barely faded from the scorched earth of Terra. A new age was dawning, an age of boundless ambition. The Emperor, having forged a fragile unity upon humanity's birth world, now cast his gaze outward to the scattered stars where his children languished in darkness. The warp storms that had isolated Terra for millennia were finally beginning to subside, their ethereal rage quieting to a low, slumbering murmur. With pathways to the galaxy once more open, the Emperor's grand design could at last be set in motion. The Great Crusade. It was a staggering undertaking, an endeavor of such colossal scale that it dwarfed any military campaign in human history. Its goal was simple, yet profound: to reclaim the lost worlds of humanity, to gather the disparate and broken remnants of a once great civilization, and to unite them all under the singular banner of the Imperium of Man. From the vast shipyards of Mars, whose allegiance the Emperor had secured through the Treaty of Olympus Mons, a fleet of unimaginable size was born. These mighty vessels, Bristling with weaponry and carrying the nascent legions of space marines were the instruments of his will. The crusade began with the reclamation of the Sol system. The first major battle was the conquest of Luna, Terra's own moon, where the strange and secretive Selenar gene cults held sway. 3 legions, the precursors to the Imperial Fists, the Ultramarines, and the Luna Wolves, led the assault. Within hours, Luna's defenses crumbled, and the Selenar surrendered, their vital genetic technologies now belonging to the burgeoning Imperium. With the home system secured, the expeditionary fleets pushed outward, a tide of steel and righteous fury against the encroaching darkness. At the head of this grand endeavor stood the Emperor, a figure of radiant power and unwavering resolve. But he was not alone. At his side was Malcador the Sigillite, a man of quiet, immense power and wisdom, whose origins were a mystery to all but the Emperor himself. Malcador was the keeper of secrets, the administrator of the growing Imperium, and the Emperor's most trusted advisor. While the Emperor led his armies to war, Malcador governed from Terra, his influence as vital as any fleet, his word carrying the weight of the Emperor's own authority. The Space Marine legions, each crafted from the gene, seed of a lost sun, were the vanguard of this new age. Yet, they were incomplete armies without their true generals. The Emperor knew his sons lived, scattered across the vastness of the galaxy by the machinations of chaos. He could feel their presence, faint glimmers of light in an overwhelming darkness. And so, as the Great Crusade pressed on, it became a journey of rediscovery, a father's quest to find his lost children. The first to be found, according to most imperial accounts, was Horus. His gestation capsule had landed on the brutal mining world of Cathonia, a planet rife with violent gangs who fought for survival in the dark, crumbling under. Horus had not merely survived this harsh environment, he had conquered it. By the time the Emperor's fleet arrived, Horus was a legend, a charismatic and brilliant warlord who commanded the respect of the fiercest gangs. The reunion was one of instant recognition. Horus knelt before his father, pledging his unwavering loyalty, a bond forged that would shape the future of the galaxy. For 30 years, Horus fought at the Emperor's side, the sole rediscovered Primarch, learning the arts of war and governance from the master of mankind himself. He was granted command of the Exixith Legion, who were renamed the Luna Wolves in honor of their early victories, and they quickly became the Emperor as most favored. The second son to be found was Lemon Russ, on the savage, ice-locked death world of Fenris, raised by giant wolves before being taken in by a tribe of humans. Russ was a figure of raw, untamed power. His meeting with the Emperor was not one of immediate fealty, but of contest. Russ challenged the stranger to a series of trials, an eating contest, a drinking contest, and a duel. Though Russ won the first 2, he was humbled in combat by his father's superior might. Recognizing the Emperor's power, the Wolf King bent the knee and took command of the V Legion, christening them the Space Wolves. Russ and his legion would become known as the Emperor's Executioners, a force of brutal and unflinching loyalty. One by one, the lost sons were found. On the bleak world of Medusa, the Emperor discovered Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, a Primarch whose hands were coated in living metal. Their meeting was another of challenge, a titanic battle of strength and will amidst the planet's volcanic mountains. Bested, Ferrus Manus joined his father and took command of the Iron Hands. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, was found on the decaying mining world of Chemos. He was a being of sublime perfection, a patron of the arts who had brought a renaissance to his bleak home. He presented himself to the Emperor, not as a challenger, but as a devoted son, eager to serve. He was given command of the 3rd Legion, soon to be known as the Emperor's children, and they strove to be the perfect embodiment of the Emperor's ideals. On the volcanic death world of Nocturne, the Emperor found Vulcan. Like his brothers Russ and Ferrus Manus, Vulcan tested the stranger's worth in a series of contests. He was a smith of incredible skill and a protector of his people, qualities that he would instill in his Salamander's legion. Rogel Dorn, the stoic and unyielding master of defense, was discovered aboard his vast starship, the Phalanx. He had already carved out his own small empire and presented it to the Emperor as a gift, his loyalty absolute from the moment they met. He was given command of the Imperial Fists, the defenders of Terra. On the civilized world of Macragge, the Emperor found Robout Guilliman, a statesman and military genius who had built a model society from the ruins of his world. He welcomed the Emperor with open arms, his administrative and tactical acumen a powerful asset to the growing Imperium. His Ultramarines would become the largest and most disciplined of all the legions. And so it continued. The angelic Sanguinius on the blighted moon of Baal Secundus, the scholarly Magnus the Red on the planet of Prospero, the grim and pragmatic Mortarion on the toxic world of Barbarus, the zealous Lorgar on the religious world of Colchis, found preaching of a single, powerful god he did not yet know was his father, the wild and mercurial Jaghatai Khan on the steppes of Chagoris, the brooding Conrad Curse in the perpetual darkness of Nostramo, the resourceful Corvus Corax, a liberator of slaves on the moon of Lycaeus. Each reunion was a unique story, a new thread woven into the grand tapestry of the crusade. As each Primarch took command of their legion, the pace of the Great Crusade accelerated exponentially. What was once a single grand army became 20, each led by a demigod of war, each with its own character, tactics, and culture reflecting their sire. The Iron Hands were masters of armored warfare, their flesh intertwined with machine. The White Scars were lightning, fast hunters employing hit and run tactics that bewildered their foes. The Death Guard were relentless and unstoppable, able to withstand environments and weaponry that would destroy lesser warriors. The galaxy felt the tread of their boots. Mighty Orquas were shattered, their warlords slain by Primarchs fighting alongside their father, such as at the Battle of Goro, the insidious Rangdan genocides, a conflict so bloody it nearly broke the Dark Angel's Legion, were eventually won. Human worlds, long isolated and fallen into ignorance or tyranny, were brought into imperial compliance, sometimes through diplomacy, but more often through overwhelming force. The Great Crusade was an era of breathtaking expansion and rediscovery, a golden age of unity and purpose, all guided by the Emperor's vision and carried out by his 20 extraordinary sons. It was a time of hope, a time when it seemed that nothing could stop humanity's ascent to its manifest destiny as rulers of the stars. As the Great Crusade pushed ever outwards, a beacon of light in the endless dark of the galaxy, one name began to shine brighter than all others, a name that would become synonymous with both the greatest triumphs and the most profound sorrows of the Imperium. That name was Horus Lupercal, the first of the lost sons to be found, and for a time the Emperor as most favored. His story began on the blighted world of Chthoniya, a planet bled dry by millennia of relentless mining, its surface a graveyard of industrial decay. The infant Primarch's capsule landed amidst this desolation, a world of perpetual twilight beneath the surface where humanity had devolved into vicious, warring gangs. It was in these dark, claustrophobic tunnels that Horus learned his first lessons of survival and dominance. He was discovered and raised by a gang overlord, growing into a formidable warrior, his preternatural strength and charisma setting him apart. even in that brutal society. He learned the harsh, guttural language of the Chthonian gangs, a tongue he would later use to connect with the men of his legion, a reminder of their shared savage origins. It is said that for 30 years, Horus was the only Primarch at the Emperor's side. In those early days of the Great Crusade, they fought as father and son, forging a bond that seemed unbreakable. The Emperor saw in Horus a reflection of his own ambition and vision, a worthy heir to his grand design. Horus, in turn, adored his father, his loyalty absolute, his desire to please him, a driving force in all he did. He learned the arts of war and diplomacy at the foot of the master of mankind, his tactical genius honed in countless campaigns. The Luna Wolves, the X-15th Legion, were his to command, their gene, seed crafted from his own. They were a reflection of their Primarch. Proud, ambitious, and utterly ruthless in battle. Recruited from the savage gangs of Chthonian, they were natural killers, their ferocity tempered by an unshakable loyalty to their gene. Father Horus molded them into the preeminent weapon of the Great Crusade, their record of compliance unmatched. They were the tip of the Emperor's spear, shattering empires and bringing lost worlds back into the light of the Imperium. As more of his brothers were discovered, Horus greeted each with a warmth and charisma that few could resist. He was the consummate diplomat, able to find common ground with even the most difficult of his siblings. He forged a close bond with the angelic Sanguinius, their friendship a thing of legend. He respected the martial prowess of Rogel Dorn and the strategic mind of Robout Gilliman, valuing them as trusted advisors. Even those Primarchs who were more difficult, like the Dour Mortarion or the ever-suspicious Perturabo, found in Horus a leader they could respect and follow. But beneath the surface of this brotherhood, there were currents of jealousy and resentment. The discovery of each new Primarch was a reminder to Horus that he was no longer the sole focus of his father's affection. A flicker of possessiveness, a fear of being supplanted, began to take root in his heart, a seed of pride that would one day blossom into something far more dangerous. The Great Crusade continued its inexorable advance, a tide of steel and fire washing over the galaxy. Humanity's lost colonies were brought back into the fold, some willingly, others by force. The imperial truth, the Emperor's doctrine of reason and scientific enlightenment, was spread to every corner of the expanding Imperium, replacing old faiths and superstitions. It was a golden age, a time of seemingly limitless possibility, and Horus was at its very heart. The zenith of this era, and of Horus's loyal service, came with the Ulanor Crusade. In the Ulanor sector, a vast Orc empire had arisen, a green tide of such immense power that it threatened to halt the Great Crusade in its tracks. The Orc war boss, Erlak Erg, had forged a disciplined and technologically advanced force, a far cry from the disorganized rabble the Imperium had faced before. The Emperor himself took to the field for this campaign, a sign of the gravity of the threat, but it was Horus who devised the strategy, a daring plan to strike directly at the heart of the Orc Empire. While other legions, including the Ultramarines and the White Scars, engaged the outer systems, Horus led his Luna Wolves in a direct assault on Ulanor Prime. The battle was a masterpiece of tactical brilliance. Horus, employing his favored Spartip strategy, bypassed the bulk of the Orc forces, driving straight for Erg's fortress palace. 100,000 Luna Wolves, supported by millions of Imperial Army soldiers, and the Titans of the Legio Mortis, descended upon the Orc capital. Horus fought with a ferocity that was legendary. He carved his way through the war boss, his elite guard, his twin lightning claws a blur of silver and blue energy. The final confrontation took place in the throne room of the Orc warlord. Horus faced Erlak-Erg, a creature of monstrous size and strength, and bested him in single combat. He then dragged the defeated war boss to the battlements of his own fortress, and, with a mighty heave, cast him down to the ground below, shattering the morale of the orc horde. The victory at Ulanor was the crowning achievement of the Great Crusade. The largest orc empire in the galaxy had been broken, and the last great threat to humanity as expansion was seemingly extinguished. To commemorate this triumph, the Emperor declared a grand celebration on Ulanor itself. The planet was remade into a trophy world, a monument to the Imperium ES might. A grand procession, miles long, was held, with millions of soldiers and thousands of war machines marching in review. It was here, at the height of his glory, that the Emperor bestowed upon his favored son the highest of honors. Before the assembled might of the Imperium, he named Horus Warmaster, granting him supreme command of all Imperial forces. He was now, in essence, the Emperor's regent, entrusted with the completion of the Great Crusade. The Emperor, his work on the battlefield seemingly done, would return to Terra to pursue a secret project of his own, leaving the fate of the galaxy in Horus' hands. For Horus, this was the culmination of all his ambitions, the ultimate validation of his worth. He was Horus Lupercal, the War Master, the first among equals. But with this new power came a new and terrible burden. The weight of an entire galaxy now rested on his shoulders, and in the shadows, unseen and unheard, the whispers of chaos began to grow louder, preying on his pride, his ambition, and the tiny seed of doubt that had taken root in his heart. The zenith of the Imperium had been reached, but the long, dark fall was about to begin. In the quiet expanse of the Great Crusade, long before the whispers of heresy would poison the starlight, many of the Emperor's sons distinguished themselves not only as warriors, but as builders. They were the architects of new worlds, the patrons of culture, and the founders of civilizations that would stand as beacons of the imperial truth. Each brought a piece of themselves, a reflection of their own nature, to the worlds they conquered and the legions they led. They did not just win wars, they shaped the very future of humanity, leaving legacies etched not only in victory, but in stone, steel, and the hearts of loyal citizens. At the forefront of these visionary sons stood Robout Guilliman, the avenging son, Primarch of the Ultramarines. More than any of his brothers, Guilliman understood that true conquest was not merely the defeat of an enemy, but the creation of a lasting and prosperous society in its wake. When the Ultramarines brought a world into compliance, the war was only the beginning of their work. Guilliman would not depart a newly conquered planet until he had established a self-sufficient defense system and left behind a council of advisors to build industries, establish trade routes, and form a just government. His mind was a marvel of logistical and civic planning, a perfect counterpart to his strategic genius on the battlefield. He authored the 40 Principia Bellicosa, a tome detailing the optimal methods for planetary conquest. But his true masterpiece was the vast and ever-expanding realm of Ultramar. This stellar dominion of 500 worlds was a testament to his belief in order, efficiency, and the potential of humanity. Macragee, the capital of this realm, and the homeworld of the Ultramarines, was a jewel of the Imperium. Its cities were paragons of clean, ordered design, its people prosperous and educated, and its military machine a model of supreme efficiency. This well-oiled system provided the Ultramarines with a constant stream of worthy recruits, allowing the Legion to grow into one of the largest and most successful of the Great Crusade, but one guided by reason and mutual prosperity. He saw the Imperium not as a conquest, but as a project, a grand and noble endeavor to elevate humanity. He even planned for the expansion of Ultramar, seeing it as a template for what the entire Imperium could one day become. In stark contrast to the sprawling, organized realm of Ultramar stood the unyielding creations of Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra. Where Guilliman built civilizations, Dorn built fortresses. His genius lay in the art of defense, in the construction of bastions so formidable they could withstand the judgment of ages. He was a master of siegecraft and fortification, a Primarch whose mind saw the galaxy in terms of angles, fortifications, and unbreakable lines. When the Emperor needed to secure his own throne on Terra, it was to Dorn that he turned. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists oversaw the design and construction of the defenses of the Imperial Palace, a task he undertook with solemn duty. He saw beauty not in artistry, but in function, not in comfort. He regretted marrying the palace as existing beauty, but knew it was a necessary sacrifice for the sake of security. His legion, the Imperial Fists, were a reflection of their father's unyielding nature. They were crusaders and defenders, builders and castellans. Their mobile fortress, monastery, the 4C Falling Seth, was a wonder of the galaxy, a starship the size of a small moon, bristling with weaponry and capable of housing an entire fleet. The origins of the 4C Falling Sith were a subject of debate. Some claimed it was a relic of the dark age of technology that Dorn discovered, while others insisted he built it himself. Regardless of its origin, it was a symbol of the Imperial Fists' role as the Emperor's Praetorians. While other legions conquered, Dorn and his sons secured. They built the walls against which the darkness would one day break, their legacy not in the number of worlds they took, but in the number they ensured would never fall. From the forge, fires of the volcanic world of Nocturne, came a Primarch whose artistry was of a different kind. Vulcan, the Lord of Drakes, was a smith and a craftsman of unparalleled skill. Raised by a blacksmith, he possessed an innate understanding of metal and fire, an ability to create weapons and armor of breathtaking beauty and devastating power. But Vulcan's greatest creation was not a weapon, but the culture he instilled in his Salamander's legion. They were more than just warriors. They were artisans, each Marine a master of the forge, painstakingly crafting and maintaining their own war gear. This practice fostered a deep connection between the warrior and his tools, a reverence for the act of creation itself. Vulcan's compassion was as legendary as his craftsmanship. He possessed a profound empathy for the common citizens of the Imperium, a trait that set him apart from many of his more aloof brothers. The Salamanders inherited this compassion, becoming known as protectors of the innocent, often going to extraordinary lengths to safeguard civilian lives, even at great tactical cost. Their belief system, the Promethean cult, was not centered on the worship of the Emperor, but on the principles of self-sacrifice, duty, and the preservation of human life. They maintained close ties with their families on Nocturne, a rarity among Space Marine legions, fostering a deep connection to the humanity they were sworn to protect. Vulcan taught his sons that true strength was not just in the ability to destroy, but in the will to protect and create. In the irradiated wastelands of Baal, a different kind of artistry flourished under the guidance of Sanguinius, the great angel. The people of Baal were survivors, hardened by generations of struggle against a toxic environment and ravenous mutants. Sanguinius, upon his arrival, did not seek to erase this harsh culture, but to elevate it. He saw the strength forged in hardship and believed it was vital for creating worthy aspirants for his Blood Angels Legion. He transformed their brutal existence into a crucible of nobility, teaching them the value of sacrifice, honor, and beauty. The Blood Angels became known for their appreciation of art and culture, a stark contrast to their savage origins. Sanguinius himself was a figure of breathtaking grace and beauty, and his sons sought to emulate him in all things. They became patrons of the arts, their fortress, monastery, on Baal a repository of magnificent sculptures, paintings, and soaring architecture. This duality defined them, the savage fury of their combat doctrine tempered by a deep appreciation for the finer aspects of civilization. They were warrior, poets, angels of both death and beauty, their legacy a testament to their father's belief that even from the harshest of beginnings, something truly magnificent could be created. Not all loyalist Primarchs were builders in the traditional sense. Some were architects of strategy, culture, and unique ways of war that would shape their legions for 10,000 years. Jakai Khan of the White Scars, the Warhawk, was a master of mobile warfare. He instilled in his legion the culture of his homeworld, Chogoris, a planet of nomadic warrior tribes. The White Scars became lightning, fast hunters, eschewing static defensive lines for swift, decisive strikes. They were masters of the hit and run attack, their jet bike squadrons tearing through enemy lines before vanishing like the wind. Yet, beneath their savage exterior, the White Scars were a deeply cultured and philosophical legion, skilled in calligraphy, poetry, and the recitation of epic sagas. Jagatai Khan built a legion that was a paradox, fiercely independent and deeply loyal, barbaric in appearance yet highly disciplined and cultured. Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard was an architect of shadows. From the lessons learned freeing the slave moons of his homeworld, he crafted a legion that specialized in stealth, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare. The Raven Guard became masters of the unseen war, striking from the shadows to decapitate enemy command structures and sow chaos before the main battle was ever joined. Corax himself possessed the unique ability to render himself unseen, a gift that passed to some of his sons. He built a legion that was a scalpel, not a hammer, designed for precise, surgical strikes that could cripple an enemy with minimal casualties. They were the Emperor's hidden hand, their legacy whispered in the silence that followed a perfectly executed ambush. On the harsh, tectonically unstable world of Medusa, Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, forged the iron hands. His belief was simple and brutal. The flesh is weak. This philosophy permeated his legion, who sought to purge their biological weakness through extensive bionic augmentation. They revered the mechanical and developed close ties with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Ferrus Manus himself possessed arms of living metal, and his sons emulated him by replacing their own hands with bionics as a sign of devotion. He was a stern and unforgiving father who taught his legion that strength was the only virtue that mattered. He built a legion that was a relentless war machine, devoid of mercy and emotion, a reflection of his own harsh worldview. Though his methods were brutal, he sought to create the ultimate warriors, spiritually and physically strong, to serve the Emperor's will without question. Finally, from the death world of Fenris came Lemon Russ, the Wolf King. The culture he built for his space wolves was one of fierce loyalty, savage ferocity, and a rejection of the rigid doctrines followed by other legions. The space wolves were a reflection of their Primarch's wild spirit, brave, boisterous, and utterly dedicated to the Emperor, whom Russ saw as his ultimate chieftain. They did not build cities of marble, but sagas of heroism. Their home, the Fang, was a fortress carved into the highest mountain of Fenris, a testament to their rugged and untamed nature. Russ fostered a unique chapter culture based on the traditions of his homeworld, with a distinct hierarchy of blood claws, gray hunters, and long fangs, all bound by oaths of brotherhood. He created a legion that was the Emperor's ultimate weapon, his loyal executioners, their legacy not in the worlds they built, but in the enemies they utterly destroyed, in the Emperor's name. These 9 loyal sons, these architects of worlds, each left an indelible mark upon the galaxy. Through their vision, their philosophies, and their unique talents, they shaped their legions and the very fabric of the Imperium. They were the builders of the Golden Age, their creations a testament to the boundless potential of humanity. In the quiet hum of a thriving city, the unyielding face of a fortress wall, the perfect edge of a master-crafted blade, and the haunting echo of a battle saga, their legacies endure, a silent, sleeping memory of what the Imperium was, and what it was always meant to be. The Great Crusade, in its boundless ambition, cast a brilliant light across the galaxy, a light of progress, of unity, of humanity's manifest destiny. But with any great light, there must also be shadow, and in the shadowed corners of triumph, tiny, almost imperceptible seeds of discord began to sprout. These were not the seeds of outright rebellion, not yet. They were the subtle, creeping weeds of imperfection, of pride, and of resentment. They grew in the fertile ground of each Primarch soul, nurtured by their unique flaws and the immense pressures of their divine purpose. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, had crafted his sons to be paragons, each a master of a different aspect of war and governance. Yet, in this grand design, he had also allowed for the echoes of humanity. He had given them ambition, pride, and the capacity for deep, resonant emotion. These qualities, when tempered and controlled, were a source of incredible strength, but left to fester, they could curdle into something far more dangerous. The imperfections of the Primarchs were not simple flaws. They were tragic extensions of their greatest strengths, shadows cast by their own brilliance. Consider Lorgar Aurelian, the Golden Sun, Primarch of the Word Bearers. More than any of his brothers, Lorgar craved meaning. He sought a purpose beyond mere conquest. He looked upon his father not as a general, but as a god. And so, he waged his wars not just with bolt gun and blade, but with scripture and sermon. He raised grand cathedrals on conquered worlds, his legionaries spreading the imperial truth with the fervor of zealots. Lorgar's faith was a powerful tool. It brought entire civilizations into the imperial fold without a single shot fired. But the Emperor had forbidden worship. He envisioned a secular empire, one founded on reason and logic, not blind faith. He saw the dangers of religion, the fanaticism and division it could breed. And so he came to the world of Monarchia, a perfect city built in his honor by Lorgar. He did not come to praise his son. He came to teach him a harsh and brutal lesson. The Emperor ordered the Ultramarines to reduce the city to ash. He forced Lorgar and his entire legion to kneel in the gray dust of their shattered creation. He publicly shamed his son, seeking to purge the faith from him with humiliation. The Emperor's intentions may have been to guide Lorgar back to the path of logic, but the result was catastrophic. Lorgar's heart, once filled with adoration for his father, was now a hollow cavern of despair. His faith was shattered, not replaced by reason, but by a profound and aching void. It was this emptiness that the whispers of chaos would later exploit. The seeds of Lorgar's betrayal were sown not in hatred, but in the ashes of his broken faith, a faith his father had so cruelly extinguished. Then there was Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, a master of siegecraft, a genius of logistics and engineering. He saw the galaxy as a complex equation, a grand problem to be solved through logic and force of will. He craved recognition for his intellect, for the cold, hard brilliance of his mind. But his talents were often thankless. The Iron Warriors were sent to fight the most grueling, attritional battles. They were the grinders of the Great Crusade, tasked with breaking the unbreakable fortresses and bleeding for every inch of ground. While his brothers, like Rogaldorn of the Imperial Fists, were lauded as noble defenders, Perturabo was seen as a grim, utilitarian butcher. He built magnificent fortresses, only to have Dorn's legion garrison them. His victories were often overshadowed by the more glamorous campaigns of others. The Emperor, it seemed, saw him not as a son, but as a tool. A very effective tool, but a tool nonetheless. A deep and bitter resentment began to grow in Perturabo's heart. He felt unappreciated, his genius taken for granted. He longed for his father's praise, a simple acknowledgement of his worth. But it never came. He was the master of the thankless task, the overlooked architect of victory. This bitterness would eventually lead him to seek validation from other, darker powers. And what of Angren, the Red Angel, Primarch of the World Eaters? His was a tragedy, written in blood and agony from the very beginning. Discovered on the brutal world of Nuceria, he was enslaved and forced to fight in gladiatorial pits. The planet's cruel masters implanted his mind with the butcher's nails, a torturous device that amplified aggression and rage while suppressing all other emotions. It was a constant, agonizing fire in his skull. When the Emperor finally arrived to claim his son, he did not save Angren's fellow gladiators, his brothers and sisters in chains. He simply teleported Angren to the safety of his flagship, leaving the slave army to be slaughtered. This act of cold, pragmatic calculation was something Angren could never forgive. He saw his father not as a savior, but as another tyrant, another slaver who cared nothing for the lives of the common man. The butcher has nails. A relic of his enslavement could not be removed without killing him, and so Angren was trapped in a perpetual state of agony and rage. He tried to replicate the technology, implanting it into his legionaries, hoping to share his burden, to make them understand his pain. But it only turned the noble world eaters into a legion of bloodthirsty berserkers. Angren's tragedy was that he was denied the one thing he craved most, a peaceful death alongside those he called family. His fury, born of pain and betrayal, would become a weapon for the ruinous powers, a storm of unending slaughter. Even the seemingly stoic and resilient Mortarion, the Death Lord of the Death Guard, harbored a deep-seated resentment. Raised on the toxic, death-shrouded world of Barbarous, he grew to despise tyrants and sorcerers. He led a rebellion of the oppressed, fighting a long and arduous war against the Xenos warlords who ruled his world. He was on the cusp of final victory, about to slay his own adoptive father, the most powerful of the alien necromancers, when the Emperor intervened. The Emperor, in a show of his own supreme power, struck the final blow himself. He denied Mortarion the satisfaction of finishing his lifelong crusade. In that single moment, the Emperor proved himself to be just another powerful being, imposing his will upon others. Mortarion, the great liberator, was made to feel small and insignificant. He developed a simmering hatred for his father, a distrust of all authority that was not his own. His obsession with resilience and his hatred of psychers would later make him susceptible to the lies of Nurgle, the chaos god of decay and despair. He sought to create a legion that could withstand any hardship, any pain. But in his quest for endurance, he would lead them into a damnation far worse than any poison. These were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a slow building storm of fractured relationships and festering wounds. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, was haunted by visions of a dark future, a future he believed was inevitable. He became a creature of terror and despair, his sense of justice twisted into a cruel and sadistic parody. He saw the hypocrisy in his father's empire, the darkness lurking beneath the golden veneer of the imperial truth. Even Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, in his insatiable quest for knowledge, strayed into forbidden paths. He delved into the mysteries of the warp, the realm of chaos, believing he could master its power for the good of mankind. The Emperor had forbidden such reckless exploration. But Magnus, in his pride, believed he knew better. His intentions were noble, but his arrogance would have devastating consequences, not just for his own legion, the 1,000 Sons, but for the entire Imperium. The seeds of discord were sown not by a single act, but by 1,000 small moments, a word of praise given to one brother and not another, a thankless task assigned to a legion already pushed to its breaking point, a father as failure to understand the unique pain and trauma of his sons. The Primarchs, for all their power and intellect, were still possessed of human hearts, hearts that could be wounded, hearts that could be filled with bitterness, and hearts that could be turned to darkness. The shadow of imperfection grew longer with each passing year of the Great Crusade, and in that growing darkness, the whispers of chaos found fertile ground, promising power recognition and vengeance to the Emperor. Loyal sons, the stage was being set for a tragedy of galactic proportions, a civil war that would tear the fledgling Imperium apart from within. The greatest threat to humanity, its future, was not some alien empire or a distant cosmic horror. It was the flawed and fractured family at its very heart. The fall of the Primarchs was not a single thunderous event. It was a slow, creeping poison, a serpent's coil, tightening almost too gently to notice. It began not with hatred for the Emperor, but with love, a twisted, broken love that festered in the shadows of their own perfect imperfections. Each fallen son walked a unique path into darkness, a road paved with their own virtues, their own ideals, their own secret pains. For in the grand design of the Great Crusade, the very qualities that made them magnificent also made them vulnerable. The Chaos Gods, patient and ancient, did not need to break these demigods. They only needed to wait and whisper. The first crack in the golden facade of the Imperium appeared with Lorgar Aurelian, the Urizen. Lorgar's sin was not pride in himself, but a desperate, yearning love for his father. He saw the Emperor not as a general, but as a god, and his word-bearers brought not just compliance, but zealous faith to the worlds they conquered. They built glorious cathedrals and taught the imperial truth as a divine creed. But the Emperor, who championed logic and reason, saw this worship as a profound failure. He made his displeasure known not with a quiet word, but with an act of utter devastation. He commanded the Ultramarines to raise Monarchia, the perfect city, the jewel of Lorgar's faithful efforts, before his entire legion. The Emperor forced Lorgar to his knees in the ash and dust, publicly humiliating him for the crime of devotion. In that moment of shame, the Emperor did not break Lorgar's spirit. He broke his heart. Into that profound wound, a new truth was whispered by his trusted lieutenants, Erebus and Corferon. They spoke of gods who craved worship, who would not punish such love, and so Lorgar, in his search for a worthy father, found four instead. His fall was the quiet, considered choice of a betrayed son seeking a faith that would love him back. This first corruption spread like a contagion, finding its way to the greatest of them all, Horus Lupercal. Horus, the War Master, the favored son, stood second only to the Emperor. His fall was not born of faithlessness, but of pride, and a growing fear that he and his brothers were merely tools to be discarded. The seed of this fear was planted by Lorgar. As agents, watered by the stresses of command and the Emperor's withdrawal to Terra, the serpent struck on the feral moon of Davin. There, Horus was wounded by a cursed blade, a weapon tainted by the plague god Nurgle, wielded by a trusted commander who had already fallen to chaos. As he lay dying, his desperate sons entrusted him to the care of the local priests of a hidden serpent lodge. In his fevered state, Erebus entered his mind, disguised as a fallen comrade, and showed him visions of a dark future. He saw an imperium where the emperor ruled as a tyrannical god, where the Primarchs were forgotten martyrs. The whispers preyed on his greatest fear, that his father's love was a lie. When Horus awoke, the choice had been made. He would not be a tool cast aside. He would forge his own destiny, and the galaxy would burn in the process. Other paths to damnation were more subtle, more personal. For Fulgrim, the Phoenician, the journey began with a single beautiful flaw, the pursuit of perfection. This noble desire became an obsession for himself and for his emperor's children. During a campaign against the alien lair, Fulgrim claimed a silver sword from their temple, a blade of exquisite, almost impossible craftsmanship. But the sword was not merely a weapon. It was the prison of a powerful demon of Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure and excess. The demon did not command or threaten. It whispered. It praised his desire for perfection, encouraging him to push every boundary, to indulge every sensation. It told him that true perfection lay beyond mortal limits. Slowly, the Legion's quest for excellence soured into decadent cruelty, and Fulgrim's own thoughts became indistinguishable from the serpent's voice in his mind. The line between artist and monster blurred, until he stood as a willing champion of the very chaos he once sought to eradicate. For some, the path was not one of temptation, but of pain. Angron, the gladiator king, was already broken, long before Horus offered him rebellion. Enslaved on the world of Nuceria, his mind had been mutilated by a horrific archaeotech device known as the Butcher's nails. These implants replaced all pleasure and peace with a constant, agonizing thrum of rage, a pain that could only be silenced by acts of extreme violence. The Emperor could not remove the nails without killing him, a failure that Angron never forgave. He despised his father for teleporting him away from his gladiator brethren on the eve of their final glorious battle, stealing from him the honorable death he craved. He saw the Emperor not as a savior, but as another slaver, trading one gilded cage for another. When Horus promised a war that would engulf the stars, Angron did not see treason. He saw a chance to finally unleash his boundless rage, to drown the galaxy in the blood that might, at last, grant him peace. Mortarian's fall was one of bitter irony. The Lord of the Death Guard hated nothing more than psychers and sorcery, a hatred born from fighting the tyrannical witch, lords of his homeworld, Barbarous. Yet, it was this very hatred that his first captain, Callus Typhon, exploited. Typhon, a secret psyker and servant of Nurgle, saw in his Primarchs' hypocrisy a weakness. When Horus made his offer, Mortarion joined not for faith in chaos, but out of a deep-seated resentment for the Emperor's perceived tyranny. But the true trap was sprung in the warp, guided by Typhon, who had murdered the Legion's navigators. The Death Guard fleet became becalmed in the Immaterium. There, a plague born of Nurgle's own design, the Destroyer Plague, swept through their ships. Their legendary resilience meant nothing. They could not die, but were trapped in an eternal cycle of agony and decay, watching his sons suffer endlessly. Mortarion, the master of endurance, finally broke. He cried out for deliverance, and Nurgle answered, offering to end their pain in exchange for eternal servitude. Mortarion, betrayed by his most trusted son, became the very thing he had always despised. Perhaps the most tragic fall was that of Magnus the Red. His sin was not malice, but an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He believed all knowledge was worthwhile, and that the dangers of the warp could be mastered. The emperor commanded him to cease his sorcerous practices, a decree made at the Council of Nicaea. Magnus obeyed, but with a heavy heart. Yet, when his psychic sight showed him Horus's betrayal, he faced an impossible choice: obey his father Seth's command and let the galaxy fall, or break his oath to save it. He chose to save it. In a desperate act, Magnus used his forbidden powers to cast a psychic warning across the stars, shattering the Emperor's secret webway project on Terra in the process. The Emperor, seeing only the catastrophic result of his son's disobedience, refused to listen to the warning. Believing Magnus a traitor, he dispatched Lemon Russ and the Space Wolves not to bring him to heel, but to utterly destroy him and his legion. By the time the truth was clear, it was too late. His world burned, his son slaughtered. Magnus, the Crimson King, saw no other path but to embrace the one power that had offered him knowledge all along. Change, the architect of fate. The seeds of heresy found fertile ground in resentment as well. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, was a master of siegecraft, a grim, thankless task. He and his iron warriors were sent to the most brutal, grinding war zones, their sacrifices unacknowledged, their victories taken for granted. While Dorn built palaces, Perturabo toiled in mud and blood. This bitterness reached its peak when his own homeworld of Olympia rebelled. In a fit of cold fury, he unleashed a horrific slaughter upon his own people, an act of genocide that left over 5 million dead. In the aftermath, consumed by guilt, Perturabo knew the Emperor could never forgive him. Horus, however, offered not condemnation, but praise for his decisiveness. To the Lord of Iron, this was the acceptance he had always craved. Even the most terrifying among them, Conrad Kurz, was a victim of his own nature, cursed with prophetic visions of the darkest possible futures. He saw only the evil in men, Sarts. He ruled through terror, believing it the only path to justice. But his methods grew ever more extreme, and his legion, recruited from the prison gangs of Nostromo, came to relish the cruelty he used as a tool. He saw his own fall in his visions, an inevitability that drove him mad with despair. He sided with Horus, not out of loyalty, but because he believed the heresy was the final terrible vindication of his grim worldview, that the Imperium and he himself were rotten to the core. And then there was Alpharius Omegon, the twin-headed serpent, whose betrayal may not have been a betrayal at all. Approached by an alien collective known as the Cabal, Alpharius was shown a vision of the future. The Cabal claimed that if Horus won, humanity would burn brightly and then gutter out, taking the Chaos Gods with them in their final extinction. If the Emperor won, the Imperium would decay into a stagnant nightmare, lasting 10,000 years, fueling the Chaos Gods forever. They presented a terrible choice: a swift death for mankind to save the galaxy, or an eternity of damnation. It is believed that Alpharius, in a final, ultimate act of loyalty, chose to side with Horus to ensure the long-term destruction of chaos, a secret he would carry to his grave. Each son, a giant in his own right, was brought low by the very essence of his being. Their pride, their rage, their pain, all became doorways to damnation. The serpent's coil had been tightening for a century, and as Horus raised his banner in rebellion, it was not the beginning of the fall, but the final terrible culmination of 1,000 small betrayals, 1,000 whispered lies, and 1,000 broken hearts. The Estvian system, once an unremarkable name in the vast archives of the Imperium, was destined to be etched in history with the blood of heroes and the ashes of betrayal. Here, in this forgotten corner of the galaxy, the War Master Horus would unleash the full, terrifying scope of his rebellion. The seeds of heresy, nurtured in the fertile ground of ambition and pride, were about to erupt into a firestorm that would consume the stars. His plan was a masterpiece of cold, calculated cruelty. It was a purge, designed to cleanse his legions of any lingering devotion to the Emperor and to annihilate those he could not corrupt. The first act of this galactic tragedy was set upon the world of Istvan III. Once a vibrant hub of human civilization, Istvan III now stood in defiance of the Imperium's light. Horus, cloaked in the guise of righteous fury, declared his intent to bring the world back into compliance. He amassed a force of overwhelming power, gathering his own sons of Horus, alongside 3 other legendary legions, the opulent Emperor's children, led by the dazzling Fulgrim, the savage World Eaters, under the command of the ever-furious Angren, and the grim, inexorable Death Guard, marshaled by the stoic Mortarion. This mighty host descended upon Istvan III, a hammer blow poised to shatter the rebellious world. The initial assault was a brutal, efficient display of the Legionese Astartes' power. The capital, Coral City, fell in a matter of hours, its grand plazas and soaring spires swiftly secured by the transhuman warriors. But this swift victory was merely the overture to a much darker symphony. A terrible secret festered in the War Master, Sart, a poison that was about to be poured upon the unsuspecting world. Scattered among the ranks of the invading force were space marines of unimpeachable loyalty. Men who held their oaths to the Emperor as sacred, men who could not be swayed from the path of honor. Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's children was one such man, a warrior whose devotion to his legion was surpassed only by his unwavering loyalty to the throne. Alongside him stood men like Garviel Loken, once a trusted advisor to Horus himself, now a man burdened by the creeping darkness he had witnessed in his Primarch. These loyalists, these paragons of virtue, were the true targets of the campaign. They were the inconvenient remnants of a bond Horus was determined to obliterate. As the majority of the legions withdrew to their vessels in orbit, a contingent of these loyal warriors remained on the planet's surface. It was then that the jaws of the trap snapped shut. The fleet above, once a symbol of imperial might, turned its devastating weaponry upon the world it had just liberated. A virus bombing of unspeakable horror was unleashed. The Life Eater virus, a terrifying bioweapon, swept across Istvan III, consuming all organic life in its path. In mere moments, a thriving world was transformed into a seething mass of decay. The very air became a venomous soup, and the proud cities dissolved into a putrid slurry. But the virus was only the beginning of the nightmare. From the command deck of Horus' flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, a single, chilling command was given: Ignite. The virus-saturated atmosphere of Istvan III erupted into a planet-wide firestorm. This apocalyptic inferno scoured the surface, turning continents to black glass and boiling away the oceans of death. Istvan III died screaming, a funeral pyre for billions of souls, its demise a stark monument to the War Master's treachery. Yet, even in this hellscape, a few sparks of loyalty endured. Saul Tarvitz, forewarned of the impending doom, had found refuge in a fortified bunker, gathering other like-minded warriors to his side. Garviel Loken, through sheer force of will and his transhuman resilience, had also survived the initial cataclysm. They were now stranded on a world of obsidian plains and smoldering ruins, hunted by those they had once called brothers. The ensuing conflict was not a battle of grand armies, but a desperate, brutal fight for survival. The Loyalists, hopelessly outnumbered, fought with the ferocity of the betrayed. They were no longer just soldiers of the Imperium. They were phantoms haunting a dead world, their armor scorched, their hearts filled with a cold, righteous anger. They fought for the emperor, for the imperium they still held dear, and for the simple, defiant act of refusing to die. For months, this grim struggle continued. They became ghosts in the skeletal remains of Coral City, their bolter fire a lonely echo in the oppressive silence. Saul Tarvitz became a legend, whispered among the traitors, a symbol of the defiance that refused to be extinguished. Garviel Loken, his faith in Horus shattered beyond repair, found a new, grim purpose in this nascent civil war. He fought with a cold, precise fury, every action a testament to the oath his Primarch had so callously cast aside. But their time was a flickering candle in a hurricane. The traitor legions, with Angron himself at their head, descended to the surface to personally exterminate the last pockets of resistance. The World Eaters, their bloodlust already a thing of terrifying legend, fell upon the survivors with savage joy. The fighting was a maelstrom of roaring chain axes and desperate last stands in the ash-choked air. One by one, the loyalist holdouts were silenced. Amidst this final brutal act of extermination, a single act of defiance shone with the light of a dying star. Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard, a man of unshakable honor, had witnessed the betrayal from orbit. He could not, would not, stand by and watch his brothers be slaughtered. He chose loyalty. Seizing command of the frigate Theisenstein, he and a small band of followers fought their way through the traitor blockade. Their lone vessel, a tiny spark of hope against a sea of encroaching darkness, carried a desperate warning to the Emperor. The Horus heresy had begun. The fate of the loyalists on Istvatherd was sealed. They fought to the last breath, their sacrifice a testament to their unwavering honor. Their story, carried on the wings of the Theisenstein, would become a chilling prelude to the darkness that was to come, a rallying cry for all who would stand against the Arch. Betrayer, the ashes of Istvan III had not yet settled when the second, even more horrific, act of Horus' grand betrayal was set into motion. The news that reached the wider Imperium was a twisted, fragmented version of the truth. Horus, a master of deception, painted a picture of a rebellion on Istvan V, led by the local governor with the support of several Space Marine legions. It was a carefully constructed lie, a lure to draw the Emperor, as most devoted sons, into an inescapable trap. 7 loyal legions were dispatched to crush this phantom rebellion. Among them were the unyielding Iron Hands, led by their Primarch, the Gorgon Ferris Manus, the Raven Guard, commanded by the Master of Shadows, Corvus Corax, and the noble Salamanders, led by the ever-compassionate Vulcan. These 3 legions formed the first wave, their Primarchs eager to bring the Emperor's justice to the traitors, wholly unaware that they were marching into a meticulously planned abattoir. The Drop Site Massacre, as this horrific event would forever be known, was a betrayal of such staggering magnitude it defied comprehension. The first wave of loyalist Astartes descended upon the black sands of the Urgal Depression, a vast, featureless plain that offered no shelter. They were met with a ferocious and unexpected resistance, but they were the Emperor's finest, and they fought with the courage and skill that was their birthright. For a time, victory seemed within their grasp. The Iron Hands, a relentless tide of iron and fury, pushed back the traitor lines. Ferris Manis, his silver hands, a blur of deadly motion, fought with a rage born from a deep and personal sense of betrayal. He had once called Fulgrim brother, and the sight of the Phoenician fighting against him filled him with a cold, unquenchable fire. And then, the second wave of drop pods descended from the bruised and weeping sky. 4 more legions, supposedly reinforcements, slammed into the earth. The Alpha Legion, the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, and the Word Bearers. These were the legions Horus had already secretly turned to his dark cause. As their drop pod ramps slammed down, they did not turn their guns on the enemy. They turned them on their brothers. The shock of this second betrayal was a psychic shockwave that shattered the loyalist lines. Surrounded, outnumbered, and utterly betrayed, the first wave was annihilated. The black sands of the Urgal Depression became a charnel house, saturated with the blood of loyal sons. The Raven Guard, masters of stealth and ambush, were caught in the open, their tactical genius rendered useless against such overwhelming and treacherous odds. The Salamanders, who valued the sanctity of life above all else, were forced to witness their brothers being cut down in their thousands. The duel between Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim was the tragic, beating heart of this monstrous battle. The two Primarchs, once bound by the deepest ties of brotherhood, clashed in a duel that shook the very foundations of the world. Their blades sang a mournful dirge of grief and betrayal, each parry a bitter memory of a bond, now irrevocably shattered. In the end, it was Fulgrim, empowered by the dark forces he had embraced, who was victorious. With a single terrible stroke, he struck down his brother, and the head of Ferrus Manus, the mighty Gorgon, rolled across the blood-soaked sand. The death of their Primarch broke the Iron Hands. Their legendary resolve crumbled into dust, and they were slaughtered without mercy. The battle devolved into a desperate, chaotic rout. The surviving loyalists, a scattered and broken remnant, fought their way back towards the landing zones, seeking an escape from the unfolding nightmare. But there was no escape. The traitor fleet in orbit had formed an impenetrable blockade. Corvus Corax and his Raven Guard, using their innate mastery of stealth, managed to escape the main killing fields, their Primarch leading them in a desperate guerrilla war from the shadows of the surrounding mountains. Vulcan, the ever-benevolent Primarch of the Salamanders, was captured, his fate a grim mystery to his surviving sons. The drop site massacre was more than a military victory for Horus. It was a mortal blow to the very soul of the Imperium. It was a declaration that the age of brotherhood was over. A new era had dawned, an era of darkness, treachery, and unending war. The dream of a united humanity, a dream forged in the fires of the Great Crusade, had been extinguished on the black sands of Istvan V. The legacy of Istvan is a scar that will never fade from the memory of the Imperium. It was the moment the galaxy held its breath, the moment the universe itself seemed to weep. The Horus heresy had begun in earnest, and the echoes of the screams from that desolate, war-torn system would reverberate through the long, dark millennia, a chilling reminder of the day that brother turned against brother, and the hope for a golden age died. The breaking of the oath was complete. The long night had begun. Ice stars landed under a bruised and weeping sky. On the scorched black earth of Istvan V, the first wave of loyalists made planetfall. 3 legions, tempered in the fires of the Great Crusade, descended to bring a reckoning to the War Master Horus. They were the Iron Hands, their hearts as cold and unforgiving as the metal for which they were named. The Salamanders, sons of Nocturne, their belief in humanity, a burning ember in the growing dark, and the Raven Guard, masters of shadow and sudden strikes, their loyalty to the Emperor as silent and deep as the void. Their Primarch walked among them, Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, his silver hands already itching for the feel of a traitor's throat. Vulcan, Lord of Drakes, his gaze filled with a sorrowful fury, and Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, his thoughts shrouded, his movements a whisper on the wind. They had come to this desolate world to extinguish a rebellion, to cauterize a wound that threatened to poison the entire Imperium. The initial assault was a thing of brutal beauty, a symphony of controlled violence. The Loyalists smashed into the traitor lines with the force of a tidal wave. Ferrus Manus, heedless of the cost, drove his warriors forward in a relentless spearhead aimed at the heart of Horus' fortress. Vulcan and Corax, leading from the front, carved paths through hordes of World Eaters and Death Guard. For every loyal son of the Emperor that fell, another took his place, their resolve unbroken, their purpose clear. From orbit, it must have seemed as though victory was inevitable. The traitor legions, the sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, the World Eaters, and the Death Guard, appeared to buckle under the sheer ferocity of the Loyalist advance. Their lines bent, then broke, and a general retreat was sounded. Even the Daemon, Primarchs, Angron and Mortarion, were seen pulling back from the fray. A sense of grim satisfaction must have settled over the Loyalist commanders. The traitors were on the run. The end was in sight. But this was not a rout. It was a carefully laid trap. As the first wave of Loyalists paused to consolidate their gains, to rearm and regroup at their designated drop site, the sky filled once more with the fire of descending drop pods. The second wave had arrived, 4 more legions, summoned to bolster the Loyalist cause. The Word Bearers, the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, and the Alpha Legion. A cheer would have risen from the exhausted ranks of the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, reinforcements. The final nail in the traitor's coffin, the first sign that something was terribly wrong, was a single blood-red flare fired from Horus' command position, arcing high into the darkening sky. And then the universe turned on its head. The legions of the second wave, their supposed brothers in arms, opened fire not on the retreating traitors, but on the unsuspecting Loyalists. The betrayal was absolute, the slaughter unimaginable. It would forever be known as the Drop Site Massacre. The Word Bearers, who had once preached the Emperor's divinity, now chanted praises to dark gods as they cut down the sons of Vulcan. The Night Lords, creatures of terror and fear, fell upon the Raven Guard like wolves upon scattered sheep. The Iron Warriors, masters of siegecraft, turned their heavy weapons upon the embattled Iron Hands, their shells tearing through ceramite and flesh with cold, calculated efficiency. And the Alpha Legion, ever the masters of deceit, were everywhere and nowhere at once, sowing confusion and death in equal measure. The retreating traitors, their feigned rout now revealed for the masterful tactic it was, turned and crashed back into the Loyalist lines. The Iron Hands, their Primarch Ferrus Manus at their head, found themselves encircled, cut off, and fighting for their very existence. It was here, amidst the blood and the ash, that brother truly turned against brother in the most personal and tragic of ways. Ferrus Manus, his heart a furnace of rage and grief, sought out the architect of this treachery, his once closest brother, Fulgrim. The Phoenician Primarch of the Emperor's children met him on the blasted heath, his face a mask of twisted perfection. Their duel was the stuff of legends, a clash of demigods that shook the very foundations of Istvan V. But Fulgrim was no longer the Primarch he once was. A daemon now wore his skin, a creature of Slaanesh that had whispered promises of perfection into his ear until nothing of the loyal son remained. In the end, it was Fulgrim who stood victorious, the severed head of Ferrus Manus held aloft for all to see. The death of their Primarch broke the Iron Hands. They were slaughtered to a man. The Salamanders and the Raven Guard, though fighting with the ferocity of cornered beasts, fared little better. Vulcan, last seen engulfed in the fire of a cataclysmic explosion, was captured by the twisted Primarch of the Night Lords, Conrad Curse. Corvus Corax, after a desperate duel with Lorgar of the Word Bearers, managed to lead a handful of his sons into the desolate wastes. forever haunted by the ghosts of their fallen brothers. The drop site massacre was more than just a battle. It was the moment the galaxy truly broke. 9 legions had revealed their treachery. 3 loyal legions were shattered, and a Primarch lay dead. The path to Terra, the throne world itself, now lay open. Horus, his victory on Iced-Man V complete, began his slow, inexorable advance. The years that followed were a blur of fire and blood. The Horus heresy, no longer a hidden schism, was now a galactic civil war, fought on 1,000 different worlds. Legions that had once stood shoulder to shoulder in the Great Crusade now sought only each other's annihilation. The Ultramarines, under their Primarch Robout Guilliman, were lured into a trap at Calth by the Word-Bearers, beginning a shadow war that would consume the eastern fringe of the galaxy. The White Scars, led by the Great Khan, Jagatai Khan, were delayed by the insidious manipulations of the Alpha Legion, their journey to Terra a desperate race against time. The Dark Angels, under Lionel Johnson, were sent to the farthest reaches of space by Horus, their immense strength kept from the decisive conflict until it was almost too late. Lemon Russ and his Space Wolves, still reeling from their own tragic conflict with the Thousand Suns on Prospero, were hounded and harassed by traitor fleets, fighting a bloody retreat back to the Sol system. And all the while, Horus gathered his strength, his armies swelling with demonic hordes and the twisted war machines of the Dark Mechanicum. He was no longer just a rebellious son. He was the chosen vessel of chaos, a being of immense power and terrible purpose. His goal was nothing less than the utter destruction of the Imperium and the death of the Emperor. Finally, after years of bloodshed that had set the galaxy ablaze, the traitor fleet arrived in the Sol system. The siege of Terra, the penultimate battle of the Horus heresy, had begun. The throne world, the cradle of humanity, was now the final battlefield. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, had turned the Imperial Palace into a fortress of unimaginable scale. He was a master of defense, his will as unyielding as the stone he commanded. By his side stood the angelic Sanguinius, and his blood angels, their beauty a stark contrast to the grim reality of the war they now faced. Jagatai Khan and his White Scars, having finally broken through the traitor blockade, rode their jet bikes across the plains of Terra, their speed a vital weapon in the defense of the sprawling palace complex. But against them came the full might of the 9 traitor legions. Mortarion and his Death Guard unleashed plagues that turned verdant gardens into festering bogs. Angren, now a demon, Prince of Khorne, led his World Eaters in a berserk charge against the palace walls, his rage a physical force that shattered stone and steel. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, laid siege to the fortress of his brother, Dorn, with a cold, bitter genius. Each bombardment a personal insult, each breach in the walls a victory in their long and hateful rivalry. The fighting was relentless, a maelstrom of death and destruction that consumed millions. The walls of the Imperial Palace, which had stood for centuries, began to crumble. The psychic shield of the Emperor, a beacon of hope for the beleaguered defenders, flickered and waned under the combined psychic assault of Horus and the Daemon. Primarch Magnus the Red. Hope, it seemed, was a dying ember. The loyalist defenders were outnumbered, outgunned, and slowly being bled dry. The Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, was still weeks, perhaps months away. Horus knew he had to force a final confrontation. He lowered the void shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, an open invitation to his father. A challenge. The Emperor, knowing that the defense of Terra could not hold, accepted. He teleported to the Vengeful Spirit, accompanied by his loyal sons Sanguinius and Rogel Dorn, and his personal guard of custodians. But the powers of chaos were strong on the traitor vessel. The loyalists were scattered, separated, and thrown into a nightmare landscape of madness and horror. Sanguinius was the first to find Horus. He was offered a final chance to join the forces of chaos, to kneel before the new master of mankind. The angel refused. His fight against the empowered war master was valiant, but ultimately hopeless. His body, swollen with the power of the chaos gods, slew the angel of Baal, his purest and most beloved brother. When the emperor finally reached Horus' throne room, he found the broken body of his son Sanguinius. What followed was a duel that would decide the fate of humanity. A battle fought not just on the physical plane, but across the shifting currents of the warp itself. The emperor, it is said, held back, unwilling to unleash the full measure of his power against his favored son, the one he had loved the most. He paid a terrible price for this hesitation. Horus, showing no such restraint, struck the emperor down, inflicting wounds that would have slain any mortal 1,000 times over. It was only when a lone custodian, a symbol of unwavering loyalty, charged Horus and was obliterated in an instant, that the emperor finally understood. The son he had known was gone, replaced by a monstrous slave to the dark gods. With a final desperate act of will, the emperor gathered his remaining power and unleashed a psychic blast of unimaginable force. It was not an attack born of anger, but of sorrowful necessity. It scoured Horus from existence, annihilating him body and soul. In the instant of Horus' death, the power of the chaos gods was broken. The traitor legions, their leader and their dark purpose gone, faltered, and then fled. The siege of Terra was over, but the victory was a hollow one. The emperor was mortally wounded, his body broken beyond repair. He was carried back to the imperial palace by a grieving Rogel Dorn, and there he was interred within the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne, a silent sentinel for the Imperium he had fought to build, and had so nearly lost. The galactic civil war was at an end, but the age of darkness had just begun. The sky over Terra had forgotten the sun. For weeks, it had been a bruised ceiling of smoke and ash and the perpetual twilight of war. An unrelenting orbital bombardment had been the siege's first breath, a storm of missiles and energy beams that shook the very bedrock of the Throne world. Though the grandest of Terra's defenses, the Aegis Void Shield, held firm against the worst of the fury, the psychological impact was immense. Every tremor was a reminder of the hate that now encircled humanity's cradle world. Every distant explosion was a funeral bell for 1,000,000 souls. On the surface, the grand imperial palace, once a continent, spanning testament to the emperor's golden vision, had become a grim fortress. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, had, with a heavy heart, scarred its beauty to ensure its survival. What were once plazas of gleaming marble were now kill zones, crisscrossed with trenches and tank traps. Statues of heroes were now little more than cover for Imperial Army soldiers, their faces gaunt and smeared with grime. From his command center within the ancient bastion, a fortress within the fortress, Rogel Dorn watched the nightmare unfold. Hololiths flickered around him, displaying troop movements, casualty reports, and the ever-shrinking perimeter of loyalist control. Each red rune that blinked into existence was a wound upon his soul, a failure he felt personally. He was the shield of the Imperium, and his shield was cracking. He rarely slept, sustained only by duty and a cold, burning resolve. His imperial fists were the backbone of the defense, the unyielding yellow stone against which the traitor tide crashed. The first true ground assault had been aimed at the Lion's Gate spaceport. It was a structure of impossible scale, a titan of metal and rockcrete that clawed its way into the upper atmosphere, a vital artery for landing the heavy war engines of the traitor legions. Horus had tasked his brother Perturabo, the master of siegecraft, with its capture, The Lord of the Iron Warriors brought his legion, full, grinding might to bear. The battle for Lion's Gate was a saga of its own, a maelstrom of violence that lasted for days. 18,000 of Dorn's imperial fists stood alongside nearly 800,000 imperial army troops, a wall of flesh and faith against the storm. But the Iron Warriors came with an arsenal forged in hell. Thousands of artillery pieces hammered the loyalist positions, turning fortified bunkers into dust and trenches into graves. The air was thick with the scream of shells and the rhythmic, hateful chanting of the damned. Perturbo's legion advanced with cold, calculated fury, their silver and black armor a grim portent of the doom they carried. They were relentless, methodical, and utterly without mercy. The spaceport fell. Its loss was a staggering blow, allowing the traitors to finally land their heaviest assets, the monstrous titans of the Legio Mortis, directly onto Terran soil. Inside the palace walls, the air itself was poison. A constant rain of black dust fell, a toxic cocktail of pulverized rock, metal, and human remains. For the UN, augmented soldiers of the Imperial Army, it was a slow death sentence, causing their hair to fall out and their teeth to loosen. Yet, they fought on. They held the lines with a courage that humbled even the Space Marines who fought beside them. They were ordinary men and women standing against the apocalypse, their faith in the Emperor the only shield they had against the encroaching darkness. While the Iron Warriors ground down the outer defenses, other legions brought their own unique horrors. Mortarion and his Death Guard advanced under clouds of choking, life eating gas, turning verdant gardens into bubbling, diseased swamps. The previously lavish Palatine Ark became an infected quagmire, a place of pox and despair the soldiers grimly nicknamed Poxville. The World Eaters, led by their demonic Primarch Angren, were a force of pure, unrestrained carnage. They cared little for strategy, only for the slaughter. They threw themselves at the walls in waves of screaming fury, their chain axes reaping a bloody harvest. And then there were the Emperor's children. Fulgrim's legion had long since abandoned any pretense of tactical necessity. Bored with the grind of siege warfare, they turned their attention to the civilian population beyond the palace walls. Their depravity knew no bounds, their acts of cruelty so vile they defied description. They were a plague of a different sort, one that fed on terror and pain. Yet, even in this darkest of hours, there were moments of impossible heroism. Ever the storm refused to be caged by Dorn's static defense. Defying orders, he led his white scars on daring jet bike charges, lightning, fast raids that struck deep into the traitor rear lines. They were a blur of white and gold, a fleeting promise of retribution. In a stunning display of audacity, the Khan would even lead a charge that retook the Lion's Gate spaceport, a victory that, while temporary, bought the defenders precious time and reignited a flicker of hope. As the siege dragged on, the outer walls inevitably fell. The fighting moved into the palace proper, a confusing, three-dimensional warren of corridors, chambers, and plazas. The defenders were pushed back, step by bloody step. The Bab Bastion, Dorn's sanctuary of strategy, eventually came under direct assault. As the walls of his own command center trembled, Dorn was forced into a chaotic retreat, his command staff slain at their posts, the cold logic of his war maps replaced by the brutal reality of close quarters combat. The focus of the war, the very fulcrum of fate, shifted to the final layer of defense, the Delphic battlement, and its final gate, the Eternity Gate. This was the last door, the final threshold before the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor himself sat upon the golden throne. And here, Sanguinius, the great angel, made his stand. He stood upon the walls, his white wings a beacon of purity against the smoke-choked sky. Before him were the last 100,000 defenders of the gate, a mixed force of his own blood angels, grim imperial fists, and weary, hollow-eyed imperial soldiers. He looked out upon their faces and saw all they had endured, the countless days of horror and loss. He knew what was being asked of them. He knew it was impossible. His voice, carried by Vox, casters along the length of the wall, was not a roar of command, but a quiet, solemn truth. He told them he did not want to be there, that he did not want the future that awaited them. If you have ever wondered how you will die, his voice resonated. Now you know. He offered them an honorable release, a chance to fall back, to spend their last moments with loved ones. He offered them his blessing and his envy. But then, his voice hardened with a resolve that was more than mortal. I will stand, he declared. I will fight. I will hold this wall. He would do it, not because he could win, but because it was right. He would do it to buy another hour, another minute, another single second for the Imperium he loved. He chose this death, here, with his back to the last door, and as one, the 100,000 defenders chose it with him. Their fear did not vanish, but their courage found its master. Most desperate battle for the soul of humanity was about to begin. The final battle had come, not on the ravaged soil of Terra, but in the cold, sterile corridors of a traitor. S vessel, the vengeful spirit, Horus flagship, hung in the void above the tormented world, a monument to his betrayal. It was here, in this corrupted heart of darkness, that the Emperor of mankind would face his most beloved son. He teleported aboard with his most loyal companions, his custodes, and the Primarch Rogel Dorn and Sanguinius, stepping into a nightmare landscape warped by the insidious power of chaos. The very architecture of the ship seemed to writhe in agony, a reflection of the twisted soul of its master. The journey to the command deck was a brutal, disorienting ordeal. The ship was a labyrinth of horrors, its corridors shifting and changing, its chambers filled with visions of despair and madness. The Loyalists were scattered, each facing their own personal hell. Sanguinius, the angel, the brightest of the Primarchs, was the first to find Horus. He knew he was no match for his brother, now swollen with the power of the Chaos Gods. Yet he faced him without fear, his heart filled with a desperate hope that he could still reach the man he once knew. But the Horus that stood before him was a monster, a vessel of unimaginable power and cruelty. The battle was short, and it was brutal. Sanguinius was slain, his angelic wings broken, his body cast down at the foot of his brother, his throne. It was a sacrifice made not in the hope of victory, but in the certainty of defiance. He would not kneel. He would not kneel. He would not break. He would stand as a testament to the loyalty that Horus had so carelessly discarded. Then the Emperor arrived. He saw the broken form of his son, Sanguinius, and a sorrow deeper than any ocean filled his soul. He looked upon Horus, his favored son, and for a moment he did not see the monster. He saw the brilliant, charismatic leader he had raised, the war master who had conquered 1,000 worlds in his name. The Emperor hesitated, his heart aching with a father's grief. He could not bring himself to unleash the full measure of his power against his own child. He held back, parrying Horus' ferocious attacks, pleading with him to see the madness of his actions. But Horus was lost, his soul consumed by the dark gods. He saw his father's hesitation not as an act of love, but as a sign of weakness. He mocked the Emperor's compassion, his words dripping with the venom of 1,000 lies. He boasted of his new masters, of the power they had given him, a power far greater than anything the Emperor could offer. The battle raged. a psychic storm that shook the very foundations of the ship. The Emperor, still holding back, suffered grievous wounds. Horus, empowered by chaos, was relentless. He broke the Emperor's sword, tore through his golden armor, and left him a broken figure on the deck of the corrupted bridge. It was then, in that moment of apparent victory, that a lone custodian, a warrior of unwavering loyalty, named Olanius Person, stepped forward. He stood between the triumphant Horus and the fallen Emperor, a single, defiant figure against a god. He knew his life was forfeit, but he would not stand by and watch his master be slain. Horus, in his arrogance, did not even deign to strike him down with his own hands. He simply looked at the custodian, and with a mere thought, Olanius Person was obliterated, his very existence erased from reality. It was in that moment of selfless sacrifice that the Emperor finally understood. The son he had loved was truly gone, consumed by the very darkness he had sought to master. The man who stood before him was nothing more than a puppet, a vessel for the ruinous powers. The hesitation, the hope, the father, all of it was a weakness that Horus had exploited. And so, with a heavy heart and a soul filled with an unbearable sorrow, the Emperor gathered his remaining strength. He unleashed a torrent of psychic energy, a blast of pure, unadulterated power that was not meant to wound, but to utterly annihilate. He did not target the body of his son, but the soul within. He scoured it clean, burning away the corruption of chaos, leaving behind only the faintest echo of the man that once was. For a fleeting moment, as the psychic fire consumed him, a flicker of the old Horus returned. A single tear rolled down his cheek, a silent testament to the tragedy of his fall. He looked at his father, his eyes filled with a dawning horror and a deep, profound regret. He begged for forgiveness, not with words, but with a look, a final, desperate plea from a soul on the brink of oblivion. And then he was gone. The Emperor stood victorious, but the cost was immeasurable. He was broken, his body shattered, his spirit wounded almost beyond repair. It was Rogel Dorn, the stoic, unwavering Primarch of the Imperial Fists, who found him. He saw the full extent of the Emperor's injuries, and knew that his life was fading fast. With the help of his remaining custodes, Dorn carried the Emperor's dying form back to the Golden Throne, the arcane device that had once been the cornerstone of his grand design for humanity's future. The Golden Throne was not meant to be a prison. It was to be a gateway, a means of accessing the vast, psychic labyrinth of the Webway, a way for humanity to travel the stars without relying on the treacherous currents of the warp. But now, its purpose had been twisted into something far more grim. It was to become the Emperor's life support, a sarcophagus of golden wires that would sustain his flickering consciousness for all eternity. Malkador the Sigillite, the Emperor's most trusted advisor and regent, had occupied the throne in his master's absence, his powerful psychic mind guiding the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that allowed for interstellar travel. But the strain was too great, even for a psyker of his immense power. When the Emperor was returned, Malkador was little more than dust, his life force utterly consumed by the throne. A voracious appetite for psychic energy. He had held the line, he had kept the light of the Astronomicon burning, but the cost was his own existence. And so, the Emperor was interred within the Golden Throne, its ancient systems interfacing with his broken body, sustaining his life, but imprisoning his soul. From that day forward, the Emperor of mankind would be a silent, unseen presence, his thoughts a psychic storm that raged within the confines of his golden prison. He could no longer speak, no longer guide his empire with his wisdom. He was a silent sentinel, a dying god on a throne of gold. His sacrifice had saved humanity from the brink of annihilation, but it had also plunged the Imperium into an age of darkness. The Emperor's dream of a secular, enlightened empire died with him on the vengeful spirit. In its place, a new faith was born, a faith that worshipped the Emperor not as a man, but as a god. The imperial cult, once a fringe belief, now became the state religion, its dogma spreading to every corner of the galaxy. Who had fought so hard to free humanity from the shackles of superstition had become the object of its most fervent worship. It was the ultimate irony, a tragic, bitter twist in the tale of a man who had given everything for his species. The Golden Throne became the heart of the Imperium, the holiest of holies, a place of pilgrimage and prayer, and from its silent, golden depths, the Emperor's will continue to be felt, a psychic presence that guided and protected his empire, a silent, eternal vigil against the darkness that threatened to consume it. The master of mankind was gone, yet he remained, a silent, broken figure on a throne of gold, a testament to the ultimate sacrifice, a symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. His dream was shattered, but his legacy, forged in the fires of betrayal and sacrifice, would endure. The age of the Emperor was over. The age of the Imperium had begun. Chapter 15. Scattered Echoes. The fates of the traitor Primarchs the Horus. Heresy burned itself out upon the blasted soil of Terra, leaving behind a galaxy choked with ash and sorrow. The arch-traitor Horus Lupercal was gone, his soul utterly annihilated by the Emperor in a final devastating act of psychic power. What remained of his physical form was taken by his grieving sons, only to be completely destroyed later by Abaddon, the new War Master of Chaos, ensuring no relic of the great betrayal could ever be venerated or used. Yet the echoes of his fall did not die with him. 9 sons of the Emperor had turned their backs on the light, and their stories continued long after their father's dream lay in ruins. They had chosen damnation, and in the long millennia that followed, each would find their own unique form of torment and power. For most of the traitor Primarchs, the path led to the Eye of Terror, a swirling vortex of raw chaos where reality bled into the madness of the warp. Here, their ultimate reward for betraying humanity was apotheosis. They were raised to the rank of Daemon Prince, their physical forms twisted and remade in the image of their new masters, their souls bound for eternity. They became immortal. Yes, but at the cost of their humanity, their very essence forever enslaved to the whims of the ruinous powers. The Red Angel, Primarch of the World Eaters, found his final form in servitude to Horn, the Blood God, already a being of pure, undiluted rage due to the Butcher. Snails hammered into his skull. His transformation into a demon prince was almost an inevitability. Lorgar, seeking to preserve his tormented brother, had orchestrated a ritual during the Shadow Crusade that saw Angren reborn as a creature of blood and brass, a towering, monstrous incarnation of slaughter. For 10,000 years, he has led his legion on countless bloody rampages across the galaxy, a force of pure destruction. He has been banished back to the warp on numerous occasions, most recently by the returned loyalist Primarch, Lion L. Johnson, who managed to decapitate the Daemon Primarch, sending his essence screaming back into the Immaterium. But, for a being of chaos, such defeats are temporary setbacks, mere pauses in an unending war. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, Primarch of the Emperor's children, gave himself body and soul to Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure and Excess. His descent began with the corrupting influence of a demon-possessed blade, but it was his own pride and insatiable quest for perfection that truly damned him. After the heresy, Slaanesh rewarded Fulgrim for his devotion, transforming him into a massive, serpentine creature with 4 arms and vast, demonic wings, a grotesque parody of his former beauty. For centuries he was rumored to be lost to the galaxy, slumbering on a demon world of unlimited pleasure, a place sought by many of his followers, but from which none ever returned. In recent times, however, Fulgrim has become more active, his appearances capricious and driven by a desire to experience every sensation the galaxy has to offer, no matter how depraved. Mortarion, the Pale King, Primarch of the Death Guard, found his destiny in the embrace of Nurgle, the plague god. His fall was one of bitter irony. For a Primarch who despised sorcery and the warp with every fiber of his being, his final damnation came when his fleet was becalmed in the Immaterium, afflicted by a plague that even his son's legendary resilience could not withstand. In agony watching his legion suffer a fate worse than death, Mortarion offered himself and his sons to Nurgle in exchange for deliverance. Nurgle granted his wish, transforming them all into plague marines and elevating Mortarion to the status of a daemon prince. He now rules over the plague planet, a toxic death world in the Eye of Terror, a miserable kingdom that mirrors the hellish world of his youth, Barbarous. He launches his plagues and armies into the Imperium, a grim and relentless specter of decay. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, was forever bound to Tzeentch, the changer of ways. His story is one of the most tragic, a tale of a son whose desire for knowledge and desperate attempt to warn his father of Horus' treason led directly to his own damnation. By breaking the Emperor psychic wards on Terra, he unleashed untold horrors and earned his father. After the Space Wolves razed his homeworld of Prospero, Magnus, broken and desperate, fully accepted the patronage of Tzeentch to save his legion from annihilation. Ascended to daemonhood, his physical form became a towering red-skinned cyclops of immense psychic power. For millennia, he resided on the planet of the sorcerers, a world within the Eye of Terror, his soul fractured and his power diminished. But in recent centuries, his fragments have been restored, and he has returned to the galaxy with renewed purpose, a sorcerer, ever seeking the knowledge that first led him to ruin. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, also achieved daemonhood, dedicating himself to chaos, undivided, embittered, and resentful of a lifetime spent in thankless siege warfare. His fall was a slow, grinding descent into cynicism and paranoia. After the heresy, during the infamous Iron Cage incident, he sacrificed the gene, seed of captured imperial fists, to the chaos gods, and was rewarded with ascension. His daemonic form is that of a colossal giant plated in silver and steel, his flesh pale and necrotic, his skull pierced with hissing cables, a being more fortress than man. From his fortress world of Medringard, he continues to wage his bitter, endless war against the Imperium he feels betrayed him. Lorgar Aurelian, the Urizen Primarch of the Word-Bearers, was the first to fall to chaos, the architect of the heresy itself. His reward was elevation to a daemon prince of chaos, undivided. He retreated to the daemon world of Sikaris, where he secluded himself in meditation for 10,000 years, forbidding anyone to disturb him. It was said he was communing directly with the gods he had brought to the galaxy's doorstep. For millennia, he was a silent, brooding presence. But with the opening of the Great Rift at the close of the 41st millennium, rumors have spread that Lorgar has ended his long exile. He has been reportedly seen walking among mortals once more, preaching the word of chaos at the head of a vast army, his faith as terrible and unwavering as ever. Not all the traitor Primarchs, however, ascended to daemonhood. Some met fates that were, in their own way, just as final. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the Night Lords, was assassinated, plagued by prophetic visions of his own death at the hands of an imperial assassin. He came to believe it was the only just end for his countless atrocities. He saw it as vindication. He allowed the Kalidas assassin M. Shen to infiltrate his fortress on Tisagwalsa, ordering his own sons not to interfere. He met his end not with a fight, but with acceptance, believing his death proved the truth of his dark philosophy, that he was a monster, and monsters deserve to be destroyed. Death is nothing compared to vindication, were his final, chilling words. The fate of the twin Primarchs, Alpharius and Omegon of the Alpha Legion, is shrouded in more mystery than any other. It is believed that one of the twins, Alpharius, was killed during the Horus Heresy by the loyalist Primarch Rogel Dorn at the Battle of Pluto. His death was felt psychically by his twin, Omegon, who then took up his brother's name and command of the Legion. Years later, after the heresy, Robout Guilliman reportedly killed the Primarch he believed to be Alpharius on the world of Escrador. Whether this was Omegon or another operative, disguised as the Primarch, remains one of the galaxy's greatest enigmas. The Alpha Legion continues its war of subterfuge and misdirection. Their ultimate loyalties, and the true fate of their Primarch, a puzzle that may never be solved. Thus, the legacies of the 9 traitor sons scattered across the long, dark millennia. Some became gods in their own right, eternal slaves to the powers they chose to worship. Others found their end in violence or mystery. But none found peace. Their echoes still reverberate through the galaxy, a constant, terrifying reminder of the day the sons of the Emperor went to war, and the dream of humanity burned to cinder. The ashes of the heresy settled across a wounded galaxy. The Great War was over, but the silence it left behind was heavy with loss. The Emperor sat broken upon the golden throne, a silent sentinel in the heart of a grieving imperium. The traitor legions had been vanquished, scattered to the eye of terror, but the victory felt hollow, for with the silence came a new and profound emptiness. The demigod sons who had remained loyal, the shining beacons of humanity, began to disappear. One by one, they vanished from the galaxy they had fought so hard to save, leaving their sons, the Space Marine chapters, to stand a long and lonely vigil. The first to depart was Jagatai Khan, the great Khan of the White Scars. For a time, his fleets were a whirlwind of vengeance, hunting down the remnants of the traitors with a speed and ferocity that none could match. His warriors, the nomads of Chagoris, followed him without question. Their storm, seers reading the future in the gales of the void. They brought compliance and retribution to countless worlds. But the Khan's heart was restless. The war had changed him, as it had changed them all. A shadow of grim determination had fallen over his once wild spirit. He had seen the depths of depravity in the galaxy, particularly in the cruel raids of the Drukhari, the Dark Eldar. One fateful day, a vast fleet of these nightmarish corsairs launched a devastating attack on the world of Coruscant. They were swift and merciless, their blades reaping a terrible harvest of souls. The Khan, never one to suffer such an affront, gave chase. He pursued the Dark Elder Raiders back to their shadowy realm, the labyrinthine dimension known as the Webway. His final transmission was stark, a simple vow of retribution. He plunged his fleet into the shimmering, non-Euclidean portal, a hunter diving into the darkest of woods, and he was never seen again. The White Scars hold a vigil to this day. They believe their Khan is still alive, forever hunting the soulless horrors in the dark city of Komarov, an eternal warrior on an endless road, hoping one day to hear the roar of his engines, heralding the return of their lost father. Next to leave the sight of men was the Wolf King, Lemon Russ of the Space Wolves. He had fought with the fury of a winter storm on Terra, his rage a palpable force against the traitors. But after the heresy, a deep melancholy settled upon him. He had seen his brothers fall, had fought against those he once called family. He remained on his death, world of Fenris for a time, a brooding king amidst his savage sons. He would often stare into the heart of the great Helix, the gene, forge of his people, as if seeking answers in its fiery depths. Then, one year, at the great feast of the Allfather, Russ stood before his assembled warriors. His voice, usually a thunderous roar, was somber. He spoke of a journey, a final quest into the eye of terror itself. He believed there was a way to heal the Emperor, a way to reverse the tragedy of his ascension to the Golden Throne. He spoke of the Tree of Life, a mythical entity from ancient lore, and his intention to find it within the realm of chaos. He chose his most trusted companions, his Einherjar, and together they boarded his flagship, the Forfenkel. His last words were a promise: "I will return for the wolf time." And with that, he sailed into the roiling heart of the warp, a lone Viking ship against an ocean of madness. His sons, the Space Wolves, await his return with unwavering faith. They believe that when the end of all things is nigh, their king will come back, and the galaxy will tremble at the sound of his final hunt. The stoic and unyielding Rogel Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, was consumed by a different kind of grief. He had held the line, had fortified the imperial palace against unimaginable horrors, but he could not shake the weight of his perceived failures. The death of the emperor, the fall of his brothers, he carried it all upon his broad shoulders. In the aftermath of the heresy, he donned a hair shirt of penitence and led his imperial fists on a crusade of atonement. They sought out every last vestige of the traitors, fighting with a cold, unforgiving fury. For years, Dorn-S fleet was the hammer of the Imperium, a symbol of its enduring strength. His final battle came aboard the Chaos battleship known as the Fardy Sword of Sacrilege Dice. Leading a desperate boarding action, Dorn and his elite Templar brethren teleported into the heart of the enemy vessel. The fighting was brutal, a maelstrom of ceramite and corrupted steel. Dorn fought as he always had, a bastion of immovable resolve, but he was overwhelmed. The reports are fragmented, chaotic. They say he fell, but his body was never recovered. All that was found was his hand, severed at the wrist, still clenched in a fist of defiance. That hand, encased in amber, became the most sacred relic of the imperial fists. It is a symbol of their father, as sacrifice, a constant reminder of their duty. Yet, whispers persist, whispers that a being of such indomitable will could not have been so easily slain. Some believe Dorn lives still, a hidden warrior, waiting for the moment to once more stand in defense of the realm he swore to protect. The fate of Vulcan, the ever-living Primarch of the Salamanders, is a tale of mystery and hope. As a perpetual and immortal, death was but a temporary inconvenience to him. He had died and been reborn countless times during the heresy, his body consumed by fire only to rise again from the ashes. His spirit, however, was forged of boundless compassion, and the suffering of the heresy wounded him more than any blade. After the war, he walked among his people, his giant frame a comforting presence. He helped rebuild, his great hands shaping steel as easily as they offered solace. But Vulcan knew he could not stay. He had a grander plan, a long game to ensure the survival of his sons and the Imperium. He crafted 9 sacred artifacts, objects of immense power and intricate design, and scattered them across the galaxy. He then gathered his legion on the volcanic world of Nocturne and told them of his departure. He would not return, he said, until they had proven themselves worthy, until they had recovered all 9 artifacts. It was a test, a great hunt, that would span millennia. His final message was one of enduring faith in humanity, and then he simply vanished. The salamanders believe he watches over them still, a hidden guardian. They continue their long search, their quest for the artifacts, a sacred duty. Each find brings them closer to the day their fiery father will return, bringing with him the promise of a new dawn. Perhaps the most tragic departure was that of Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord. The heresy had scarred him in ways few could comprehend. His brilliant mind, once a beacon of tactical genius, became a place of shadows and self-recrimination. He had attempted to speed the rebuilding of his Raven Guard by using forbidden genetic techniques, a secret gift from the Emperor himself. But the knowledge had been tainted by chaos, and the resulting Space Marines were twisted, monstrous beings, a horrifying parody of the Astartes. Racked with guilt, Corax locked away the forbidden knowledge and fought the rest of the war with a heavy heart. When the fighting was done, he could find no peace. He saw the faces of his monstrous sons in his dreams. He felt their pain, their corrupted existence, a stain upon his soul. One day, he stood before his legion, his face a mask of sorrow. "Nevermore," he whispered, a word that would echo in the halls of their fortress. Monastery for 10,000 years. He then turned and walked into the darkness of the void, his destination the Eye of Terror. He went, he said, to seek his own absolution and to hunt his traitorous brothers who had brought such ruin upon the galaxy. The Raven Guard say he did not die, but was transformed. He became a creature of shadow and vengeance, a specter of justice hunting the warp, a silent, unseen avenger delivering the Emperor's judgment to those who had betrayed the light. And so, the sons of the loyal Primarchs were left without their fathers, their guides, their living gods. They became orphans, scattered across a hostile galaxy. Yet, in their loss, they found a new purpose. They became the guardians of their fathers, legacies, the keepers of their vows. They stood the long vigil, a thin line of ceramite and faith against an encroaching darkness, forever awaiting the return of the lost sons of the Emperor. Their watch was just beginning, a watch that would last for 10,000 years. For 10,000 years, silence. For 10 millennia, a perfect, unchanging stillness. Within the Temple of Correction on Macragge, Robout Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, sat upon his throne. He was not truly dead, but held in a state between moments. A fly in ancient amber, a stasis field, a bubble of frozen time, preserved him at the very instant of his passing. There, upon his regal corpse, the mortal wound inflicted by his traitor brother Fulgrim was forever fresh. A single, poisoned slash across his throat, glistening as if dealt only a second before. His body, clad in the armor of reason, was a sacred relic, the centerpiece of the most holy shrine in all of Ultramar. Millions of pilgrims journeyed across the stars just to witness the fallen son of the Emperor, forever poised on the edge of oblivion. Some even whispered that the wound was slowly, miraculously healing, a testament to the Emperor's divine power. It was a comforting lie, a flicker of hope in a galaxy choked by darkness, for within a stasis field, change is impossible. The galaxy outside this bubble of tranquility had spiraled into a nightmare. The 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler had torn the heavens apart. Cadia had fallen, and with it, the great barrier holding back the tides of chaos was shattered. A wound of cosmic scale, the Cicatrix Maledictum, had split the Imperium in two. For the first time in millennia, the light of the Astronomicon was obscured, plunging countless worlds into isolated darkness. Hope was a dying ember, about to be extinguished. It was in this, the Imperium's darkest hour, that a desperate alliance arrived at Macragge. They were a strange fellowship, born of desperation. Belisarius Cawl, an Archmagos Dominus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a being of cold logic and arcane science, who claimed to have walked the galaxy for all 10,000 years of Gilliman. Slumber, with him came a stranger company still. The Eldari, specifically Yvraine, the emissary of the nascent god of the dead. This alliance of the machine, servant, and the ancient Xenos was unheard of, a heresy of the highest order. Yet they were escorted by survivors of Cadia, including the living saint, Celestine, and they brought with them a singular, unbelievable purpose: to awaken the sleeping Primarch. Macragage itself was under siege. The Black Legion, learning of this impossible plan, had descended upon the world in force. War raged in orbit and on the ground. Even the hallowed fortress of Hera was besieged. Marnius Calgar, the valiant chapter master of the Ultramarines, fought with the fury of a demigod to defend his primogenitor's tomb. But the tide of chaos was overwhelming. It was into this crucible of battle that the strange saviors arrived. Inside the Temple of Correction, before the silent throne, the air crackled with tension. The Ultramarines' honor guard stood rigid, their distrust for the Eldari palpable. To let a Xenos witch near their sacred father was a violation of every oath. But Calgar, seeing the desperation of their cause, gave his assent, or the certainty of utter damnation. The process was a fusion of the arcane and the divine of science and sorcery. Belisarius Cawl, with mechanical arms whirring and clicking, began to carefully remove the ancient armor of reason. He had spent 10,000 years preparing for this moment, crafting a new suit of power armor. The armor of fate. This was no mere battle plate. It was a marvel of technology, a life support system of unparalleled sophistication, designed with a single purpose: to sustain the Primarch and counteract the ancient poison that still lingered in his veins. As Cawl worked, Yvraine stepped forward. The air grew cold around her. Whispers echoed in the chamber, the voices of dead Eldari, for she was the priestess of Inide, the god of death. Cawl's technology could mend the body, heal the physical wound, but it was Gilliman, soul that had been grievously injured. Yvraine reached out, her fingers tracing strange patterns in the air. A ghostly, green-white energy flowed from her, swirling around the enthroned Primarch. It was the power of Inide, the collected energy of departed souls, a force that could cheat death itself. The honor guard watched, their hands tight on their bolters. They witnessed the unthinkable marriage of Mechanicus tech, sorcery, and Eldari soul. Magic Cawl fitted the final plates of the armor of fate onto Gilliman's body. Yvraine placed her hands upon the Primarch's chest, her voice a low, melodic chant outside. The sounds of battle reached a crescendo. Black Legion Terminators had breached the inner sanctum, their weapons roaring, and then, with a final desperate surge of psychic power from Yvraine, the stasis field collapsed. For the first time in 10,000 years, a sound filled the shrine. A single, ragged breath. Robout Gilliman, his eyes the color of the clear Macragge sky, snapped open. The pain was immediate, a fire in his throat where Fulgrim's blade had struck. But it was quickly suppressed by the advanced systems of his new armor. More overwhelming was the sensory flood. 10 millennia of history, of psychic noise, of the galaxy's unending agony, crashed into his mind. He saw not the ordered, rational imperium he had fought to build, but a decaying, baroque nightmare. He smelled the thick, cloying incense of a religion that worshipped his father as a god, an idea that would have been abhorrent to the emperor himself. He was on his feet in an instant. The transition from stasis to action was seamless. His strategic mind, the finest in the galaxy, assessing the situation with cold, frightening clarity. He saw the black-armored traitors desecrating his home. He saw the strange Eldari priestess, the towering tech priest, the grim-faced ultramarines, fighting a desperate last stand. There was no time for questions. There was only the enemy. Belisarius Cawl presented him with a weapon, not his own trusted gladius, but the flaming sword of the Emperor himself. Guilliman grasped the hilt, and the battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat. Everyone, loyalist and traitor alike, froze at the sight of a myth made real. A demigod reborn. A Khorne berserker, lost to the blood haze, broke the spell, charging with a mindless roar. Guilliman met him not with fury, but with the cold, efficient grace of a master swordsman. The Emperor's sword flared, and the berserker was bisected in a single, clean stroke. And then the avenging sun went to work. He moved through the Black Legionnaires like a force of nature. He was a relic from a forgotten age of warfare, an age of demigods. His every move was precise, economical, and utterly lethal. The traitors, who had fought their way through the finest warriors of the 41st millennium, were as children before him. He coordinated the defense with a few sharp commands, his voice ringing with an authority that had not been heard in the galaxy for 10,000 years. The Ultramarines, reinvigorated by the presence of their living founder, rallied around him. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. The Chaos Invaders, who had been on the verge of victory, were broken and routed. Guilliman ensured that none who had defiled his home would leave it alive. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of battle and the bodies of his enemies, the true weight of his return settled upon him. He looked upon the faces of his sons, the Ultramarines. They were warriors of great courage, yet they looked at him with a religious awe that deeply unsettled him. He spoke with Marneus Calgar, with Belisarius Cawl, and with Yvraine. He listened to the story of the last 10 millennia. He learned of the fall of Cadia, the Great Rift, the division of the Imperium. He heard the truth of the Imperium he now inhabited, and his soul recoiled. "Look what they've made of our dream," he said, his voice a low snarl of anguish. "This bloated, rotting carcass of an empire is driven not by reason and hope but by fear, hate and ignorance. Better that we had all burned in the fires of Horus ambition than live to see this." It was a realm of superstition, of decay, of ignorance. The imperial truth, the secular vision of his father, was dead. In its place was the imperial creed, a monstrous religion built on the worship of the emperor as a silent, distant god. This was the ultimate victory of his traitor brother, Lorgar. The dream of a rational, enlightened humanity was gone, replaced by a dark parody. For a moment, despair threatened to consume him. The task before him was not one of reconquest, but of saving a civilization from its own self-inflicted decay. The scale of it was unimaginable. But then, looking out from the ramparts of his fortress, he saw the common people of Macragge, already working to repair the damage of the war. He saw his Ultramarines, born into this dark age, who fought on without question, their courage unwavering. They had known nothing but this unending conflict, yet they still had hope. He, who had seen a brighter age, could do no less. His grief and pain were a cold, hard knot within him, but his rage he kept. That he would have use for. He was Robout Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, the avenging sun. But now he was more. He was the Lord Commander of the Imperium, the Imperial Regent, the living voice of the Emperor, a lone beacon of reason and hope, ignited once more in an endless, suffocating darkness. The galaxy had forgotten what it was to have a Primarch walk among men. He would have to teach them. His long vigil was over. His war The true war had just begun. Chapter 18. The Lion's Roar. Lionel Johnson awakens. Deep within the cold, silent heart of the rock, a legend stirred. For 10,000 years, Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the Dark Angels, had slept. He was not dead, but held in a slumberous state, hidden from his own sons by the mysterious and silent watchers in the dark. They had tended to his grievous wounds, sustained in his final, tragic duel with his foster father, Luther, on the day Caliban was destroyed. While his physical form mended, his spirit wandered, adrift in the timeless expanse of dreams, as the galaxy itself was torn asunder by the great rift, a wound that bled the madness of the warp into real space. A change occurred in the hidden chambers of the rock. The air, still for millennia, began to move. The lion's two hearts, once beating with a funereal slowness, picked up their rhythm, a steady, powerful drum against the suffocating silence. The watchers in the dark, ever present, drew closer, their cowled heads bowed. The moment they had guarded for 10 millennia was finally at hand. The awakening was not a sudden, violent eruption. It was a gradual return, a slow unfurling like a dormant giant, stirring from an age of stone. The lion's eyelids, sealed for 100 centuries, fluttered. A breath shallow at first, then deep and resonant, filled his ancient lungs. He opened his eyes, and they were the same emerald green, as sharp and piercing as the day he fell. There was no confusion, only the cold, hard certainty of a warrior returned. He rose from his bier, his immense form casting a long, imposing shadow in the dim light. Clad in simple robes, he radiated an aura of power that was its own form of armor. The watchers in the dark presented him with his war gear, the lion's helm, the elegant power sword named fealty, and the emperor's shield. As his hands closed around these familiar weights, a cold and clear purpose settled over him. His first steps from the chamber were met with the stunned, disbelieving silence of the handful of dark angels who guarded the rock's deepest sanctums. They fell to their knees, their faces a mixture of awe and reverent fear. The legend was real. The Primarch lived. The whispered hopes of his return, a myth passed down through generations, had become a sudden, breathtaking reality. The lion did not speak. His presence was a proclamation in itself. He moved through the labyrinthine corridors of his fortress, monastery, his every footstep echoing with the weight of ages. He saw the changes in his legion, the scars left by 10,000 years of shame and regret. He saw the obsession that had consumed his sons, the relentless hunt for those they called the fallen. A profound sorrow flickered in his gaze. His re-emergence into the galaxy was not one of grand ceremony. It was quiet, deliberate, and purposeful. He learned of the dire state of the Imperium. The Great Rift had split the galaxy in two, creating a vast swath of space known as Imperium Nihilus, where the light of the Astronomicon could not reach. It was an age of darkness and despair. Yet, the lion was not a creature of despair. He was a creature of the hunt. He did not immediately seek out a grand army. Instead, his mysterious forest walk ability, a power that allowed him to move through a strange, otherworldly woodland that connected disparate places in the galaxy, led him to his first quarry, his lost sons. He began to find the fallen, not to punish them. He came to a startling realization. Not all of them were traitors. Many had been deceived, victims of the same lies that had corrupted Luther. He offered these wayward sons a chance at redemption, a new purpose at his side. They would no longer be the fallen. They would be the risen. With his small, growing band of risen, the lion began his quiet war. He did not seek to rule or to command vast fleets. His purpose was simpler, more direct. He would protect the innocent citizens of the Imperium who were now trapped in the darkness of Imperium Nihilus. He established the Lion's Protectorate, a region of space under his direct protection, a small beacon of hope in a galaxy consumed by shadow. Inevitably, his actions drew the attention of the wider Imperium. News of his return spread, a myth given form. To the beleaguered forces of humanity, it was a miracle. But the Lioness' return was truly announced to the galaxy, not with words, but with an act of monumental violence. His brother, the Daemon Primarch Angren, a being of pure, corn-fueled rage, was carving a bloody path across the stars. The Lion tracked him to the war-torn world of Idolatros during the events of the Arcs of Omen campaign. The two brothers met on a battlefield of fire and death. Angren, a winged monster of rage and fury, roared a challenge. The Lion, grim and resolute, met him without a word. The ensuing duel was a clash of titans. Angren was raw, unrestrained power, a hurricane of hate. But the Lion was a hunter, patient and cunning. He had learned to fight monsters in the dark forests of Caliban, and he used every ounce of that ancient skill. He weathered Angren's furious assault, his shield absorbing blows that could shatter fortresses. He was disciplined, precise, turning his brother's own mindless rage against him. Waiting for the perfect moment, the Lion struck. He drove his sword deep into the Daemon Primarch's throat, and then, with the Emperor's shield, he smashed his brother's skull, shattering his physical form and banishing him back to the warp. The victory was a clear and undeniable statement. Lion L. Johnson was back, and he was more dangerous than ever. He had faced a Daemon Primarch and won. Yet the Lion took no joy in his triumph. He knew it was just one battle in an endless war. He eventually met with his brother, Robout Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium. The reunion was tense. Two brothers, separated by 10 millennia of history, so different in their nature. The statesman and logistician, the Lion, the taciturn hunter and strategist. There was no warm embrace, only the shared burden of their father's dying empire. The Lion did not approve of the superstitious, dogmatic state of the new Imperium, and he certainly did not approve of how Guilliman had broken his legion into smaller chapters. But he also recognized the immense weight Guilliman carried. He saw a brother weary from a long, lonely vigil, and so, while they did not always agree, they found a shared purpose. Guilliman would focus on holding the Imperium together. On the grand strategy of survival, the Lion would return to what he did best. He would be the Knight of Nihilus, a guardian for the lost and forgotten half of the Imperium. He walks a solitary path, a shadowy figure moving through the darkest corners of the galaxy. He is not a builder of empires, but a protector of its people. He is the hunter in the dark forest of the 41st millennium. His roar, a promise of vengeance against the monsters that plague mankind. He is the Lion of Caliban, the first Primarch, returned not as a king, but as a silent, deadly guardian for an age of unending war. And in the quiet moments, as he looks out into the star-dusted void from the ramparts of the rock, he remembers the dream of a united humanity, an ember of hope that fuels his lonely, eternal hunt. For he is the Lion, and his watch has begun anew.